The great Daryl Kerrigan once said, "It's not a house, it's a home, and a man's home is his castle." I was lucky enough, in my youth, to have a stable and happy suburban fortification here in Sydney, living the Australian childhood dream on the almost quarter-acre block in the suburbs. Eventually, my wife and I would start our own journey of turning an empty dwelling into a special place, albeit in the downsized modern scale of apartment living that now dominates most young Australian couples' realities. We've been here in our own castle unit now nearly 10 years, and it has grown and changed with us, recently undergoing major upheaval as a princess moved in and proceeded to take over every square metre of available floor space. Sadly though, at the same time as this new chapter for us began, I lost that connection to my own childhood as my parents sold up to retire up the coast, and my 120-year-old family home faced the relentless march of progress. The last time I went to see it, it looked like this. A bare, barren and muddy block of dirt. Not even the old jacaranda survived the purge, which saddened me greatly. But it also got me thinking of another quote from that Aussie classic film. You can acquire a house, but you can't acquire a home. Because a home is not built of bricks and mortar, but of love and memories. You can't pay for it, and you're just short-changing people if you try. Laurie Hamill. The house was sold, and then it was gone. But all the wonderful memories still remain, and now we're making new ones, as a family of 3, right here in our own tiny dominion. This little unit gave me my first workshop, which led to the hobby of woodworking, which in turn has played a big role in the transformation of an empty shell into our home, and now the home of our daughter. So today I want to revisit all the projects, the step-by-step improvements, both woodworking and some DIY, that I've made to this place over the past decade, so that when the inevitable happens and we move on as our daughter grows, there will always be a record of our time at the first Chateau de Fixit Fingers, otherwise known as Kimbara. And what better place to start than with my most popular project on YouTube ever, converting some giant old wardrobe doors into more practical sliders so they didn't take up half the room. At the end of each build, where possible, I'm going to revisit the projects to show you how they've stood up all these years later. So stick around for that. Let's get started. A really long way. They are fairly huge doors. So I can't even get this door all the way open because of the couch. So the trick is to put sliders in. I'm going to DIY it because I priced up getting it done professionally and it was prohibitive, shall we say. What I'm going to be using is some track from the good old Bunnings big box store. This one here is by Caldroy. It'll take 25 kilos per door, and my doors are going to be hollow core MDF. Painted just plain white, very simple, and we'll attach some trim. Alright, let's kick off the build and then show you how to install these as well at the end of it, hopefully without too many hiccups. Right, first stop is off to the local timber yard to pick myself up the MDF sheets and some pine to make the frame out of. Bit of car park cutting never goes astray, so I can fit everything in the back of the wagon, and while I won't show me cutting down the sheets back at home, this is pretty much how it would have happened. So we're all unloaded, and here is what I need for the doors and the trim. Most importantly, the first thing I've done, apart from transferring the measurements from SketchUp onto a piece of paper so I can read them easily, is get all of my wood and mark out what every piece is for. This beast is going to get a workout today. First project where I'm really going to get to put the miter saw through its paces, and already I'm absolutely in love with this machine. It is a really good investment and a great addition to the workshop. I can absolutely smash through these cross cuts, which, while I could have done previously, would have taken me 3 or 4 times as long at least. I can square up multiple pieces all at the same time, use stop locks to get everything exactly the same length, and the results were fantastic. Because I don't want to have any external screws showing, I've decided to pocket hole everything with the K5 Kreg jig. Fairly standard procedure for the first part. All the holes just went into the rails. Now, one of my biggest challenges for this project was these doors are 2.3 meters tall, and I don't have a bench big enough to hold them, so I had to set up everything on the floor, and this is how I like to do my Kreg jigging with the double clamps in that situation.
Give the frame some strength and stability, we're cutting some miters, actually using miter saw for miters. I forget where I got this little trick of pushing up your wood hard against the blade, then raising the blade and coming back down to nip off a bit. Might have been Pask makes, but it works really well to fit things in. Now you can use the Craig jig to do miters. As long as you do a nice test piece like I've got here, ensure everything's working properly, and this little stop block on the K5 helps too to get some repeatable positioning of the holes. It will pull it tight just like it will with a standard joint. They look a little bit funny, but these are all going to be sandwiched in between two sheets of MDF, so no one's ever going to see them. Same procedure, just as you would. Clamp them in, smack in the screws, and you get a nice tight joint, even with the angled wood. Constantly checking for square, a la pallet punter. Not quite as addicted as him, but I do like my set square. Off camera, I cut a middle brace, again with some funky little miters in there, and the joinery came out so lovely, it's going to be a shame to cover it up in a few minutes. Quick wobble test to make sure I had adequate strength. I'll get even more when the sheets go on. A few minutes later, and there were two. Now I had to remove the lower rail because I needed to cut a relief slide groove for the floor runner. There it is. Going to go halfway through those boards. So we pulled out the router table, and in several passes, just with a 6mm router bit, 1/4 inch for you Americans, I was able to hog out the middle of it. So these doors basically hang from the top. That little plastic insert is the only guide that's going to be keeping them on track down the bottom. Now I went with 6mm MDF for this. Here I am just marking out where all my wood supports are going to be, so I know where to put pressure on for the clamps. It did make it kind of heavy, and maybe you could get away with 3, but I picked up the 3 at the yard and it just seemed to have too much flex in it, so 6mm it is, even with the extra weight. Very, very stressful glue up here. I don't have enough clamps to do this properly, and I wish I had a few more, but don't we all? Paint tins and bricks weighed it down in the middle. And a few hours later I could come by. I had many glue ups to do. I did these over a series of days actually to get everything done. Also a bit of a pain gluing it up this way because I had to scratch off all of the excess to make sure the back panels are going to fit on well. Now because I was being a tight ass, I actually got away with 3 sheets of 6mm MDF. If I bought a 4th one, I wouldn't have had to use 2 separate pieces on the back. I could have just glued them up exactly like I did the front. But it's the back of the door, no one's ever going to see that slight join. And I mean, I could do this in 2 sections. Let's see that again. That was bloody lucky. No harm done. There was a bit of water underneath one of my non-slip floor tiles that sent me flying. Back on track, and in case anyone wanted to destroy these doors in 30 or 40 years time, brand all the things. I left a little love note in one of my stickers, just to say how they were made and when they were made. The pipe clamps are going to cinch together my 2 panels. I said, again, you could avoid this step just by not being tight and buying a full sheet of timber for it. In one way, it did make the glue up a bit easier. Just meant I had more glue ups. Now, I've been needing a bloody sawhorse for ages, and I've never made one until today. I really, really needed it for this next stage to get the doors up off the floor. So, some bed slats, and a few minutes later, we had that solution sorted. Here we have the complete sandwiched doors with 2 sheets of MDF over the frames. My first thought was to use the flush trim bit on the router, and then the planer to go down the edges, followed by the sander. And that worked to get rid of all the glue and flush everything up. But I then realised on the second door I'd been a dill because I could use a circular saw and a straight edge to get the same effect much bloody faster. Now because I didn't have clamps, I had a few places where there were some gaps, but doing a bit of magic with some glue and the orbital sander, bang, all gone, no more gap. Love it. Cleaning up the little ridge line between the two joined panels on the back of the door. Dodgy hand tool usage warning. That saw cost me about $2 10 years ago. This nice new little one I got off Dave Stanton's channel. Oh, I love this little Japanese flush trim saw. It is 10 times sharper than the big one, and made some quick work of this additional mortise. Now, what these are for is, on the routed edge, I hadn't gone into the stiles, so I had to kit out one of them, but only one. Here on the second door, you'll see me going to the other side. So this is basically to hide that little groove from the casual observer, but also by leaving the wood on one end of it, it's going to act as a stop, and you'll see why that's important towards the end of the project. Look, I really am very, very bad at hand tools, but this actually worked kind of well. Sandpaper on a stick, clean up what the chisel couldn't quite do, and that groove is lovely. Power tools and beer, not a great combination. Power tools and painting, especially when you've just done a favour for your neighbour and he drops off the beer for free, a bonus. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the 3 or 4 days of painting that this was. I wanted to use my spray gun, but of course it happened to be bloody raining the whole time, and I wasn't going to use the spray gun inside, so brush and roller it was. 2 coats of undercoat sealer, and I think I ended up doing 4 coats of white on the front and 2 coats of white on the back to get these looking schmick.
What is it with these bloody little flies that gets them so attracted to fresh white paint? Get off, you little bastard. At least he's not stuck. Suicidal flies.
Now came the stressful part. I had to get 2 20 kilo 900 by 2300 millimeter doors up 2 flights of stairs and around a few narrow corners. So I patted off the ends, crossed my fingers, and hoiked it all the way up. Carefully. Very, very carefully.
Now the hardest part of the whole build, getting this through this. Just did it like 2 seconds ago and I've already forgotten how I did it. This is the second door. I'm meant to be good at physics. Hey. Don't take out the light. Oh, that's dead set the hardest part of the whole job. I hope. I'm going to reuse this hardware on the sliding doors, but everything else has got to go. Looks like Drew Fisher installed these for me and even managed to paint over the damn slotted screws as well. What do you know, that actually worked. Yeah. 1 down. 17 to go.
Be gone, demon screws. Now, removing those left me with an ugly mortise problem. So while I didn't film it, I quickly went downstairs, got some plywood, glued it together, cut off some very, very thin strips, and then with my makeshift bench hook upstairs, and again this little flush saw that I'm absolutely loving, I cut down to size some packers just to glue them in and fill the ugly voids. One side I could clamp them, the other side I had to actually put a few nails in because there was no clamping surface. Now, a problem probably unique to my situation is this piece of wood at the top of the shelves. It was actually going into the door jamb, which was going to stop my sliders from being able to go in deep enough. I used a circular saw and then the little Ryobi jigsaw, and again my new favourite little handsaw, in order to knock that off. There were actually some brads which I hadn't noticed in there, and fortunately the new Diablo blades went straight through them. Couldn't see any damage on the blade either, so I got really lucky there. I just punched the damn nails all the way into the fiberboard so that they wouldn't cause any more problems. A quick sand, and by then the glue had dried on the mortise covers. I DIY'd a Diablo sanding net onto my little mouse sander, brought those back, took out the dust from that sander, Mixed it with some wood glue, just white PVA, and made my own bog, because I'm not really supposed to be going out to the hardware store right now in current climate. Filled it in, made them look a bit pretty, sanded it back, and we can come back and put some paint on. I ended up repainting the entire frame around the door there, just cut it back and then a few coats, undercoat, and the trim paint, same colour as the doors. Now to finally install the rail. It was aluminium, so I could just pop downstairs to the miter saw and taking it very slowly, use my regular wood chopping blade to get through it. I took the same amount off each end in order to preserve the balance of the screw holes. And just because I don't trust anyone or anything, I added my own extra screw holes in between the ones that were supplied to give some extra strength. It says it can take 25 kilos per door, but my doors were 20 kilos each, so as I was approaching that maximum weight, better to be safe than sorry, and it only took a few seconds to whack a few extra screws in. Now, I will say, make sure you measure really carefully when installing these rails. Give yourself enough room in order to have the door mechanism going freely. I had to adjust mine a little bit. Then we could screw the wheels onto the top of the doors. Luckily, these are all adjustable, both in height and position after you put them on there, so you get a bit of play.
Alrighty, first attempt at hanging. I'm not sure if I've got enough clearance in the back, and I'm really hoping nothing falls down on my thing. Let's try it.
And as you can see, that was a bit of a pain to try and hang them. Got there in the end.
Hey! We've got a bloody door! Holy moly! Though this is the one that worries me a bit. You have to tilt these to get them on, and the way they recommend it is to undo 3 of the screws a little bit, about 2 turns, to give you some play in the track when you hang the second 20 kilo door. I'm hoping this doesn't tear it out of the ceiling, but it's what the instructions say. Let's find out. That was surprisingly easy. They're touching slightly, but honestly, I don't really care too much. The width of my jamb was going to be fairly tight as to the gap in between these doors, and the number of times they're opened over the years, I'm just hoping that the paint is strong enough to take it. Otherwise, I'll just have to touch the paint up every so often. Ideally, you'd have a larger gap in here, but that's just a newbie mistake that I've made, and I'm just going to have to get the trim around it, and we're pretty much done here. Right, positioning these is actually quite tough. I want to sink them down under the carpet. So I've marked out where they need to go. And then I've taken the Stanley knife and I've cut a flap on 3 sides. Got rid of the underlay here just to give it a bit of space. So it's going to end up looking like that. And with that little flap, I was able to mark out where I'm going to drill the holes, sadly in the concrete as usual for me, always bloody concrete, and I'll drill those down and have some light anchors to hold that in place.
Shame no one's ever going to see those again, being under the doors, but geez, they looked really neat. Installing the hardware, I thought about getting the fancy jig, but it was only 2 handles, so I could just do that by eye, measured it up very carefully and got them to fit in the end. One final reinstallation of the doors, and there was a lot of fussing around here to be honest. And we're looking good, very happy, nice and smooth. And here's where that little dead end on my bottom groove comes in. You can see there's always going to be a 5 centimeter gap between the handle and the door when they're fully closed. off camera, cut myself up a top piece of trim, which I learnt is called a pelmet, up there to hide that top rail. I put a decorative chamfer on the top and I cut out a rebate down the bottom because my front door actually sits a bit proud of that frame due to its width. A brad nailer would be very nice. Hint, hint, wifey, birthday coming up. Yep, Makita, battery powered. That'd be great. Thanks. However, for now, we were back to the hammer and the punch. And of course, I managed to cut the pelmet too short and actually needed to put some chocks in either side, but a few bit of paints and some bog, and that hides all sins.
Well, there we go. All done, and this room has never really been cleaner since we had to get all the sawdust out of here from a lot of sanding and hacking around. I'm really happy with how these turned out, though they're far from perfect. I have saved hundreds, if not thousands of dollars by doing this myself. Maybe one day I'll come back and do the insides as well, as, you know, these shelves here are not exactly the most practical layout for a modern wardrobe, but having the sliding doors has just been such a good thing and improvement for this room. So these doors were completed in April of 2020. It's now 2024 and nearly the end of the year at that. And they look fantastic for between 4 and 5 years old. I've had zero issues with them. Everything has worked exactly how I wanted to. There's never been catches, never been breaks, nothing along those lines. And even though I was worried about the slight rubbing, there is no damage whatsoever on the door there where they touch as they pass. In fact, there's only one thing that's wrong with these wardrobe doors, and that is this. Remember how I said I was going to redo the inside of this wardrobe? Yeah, that never happened. It is exactly the same as it was before, and a jolly good mess. But from a project perspective, mwah, perfect. Love it. So the way we'll tackle these videos is room by room, I think. And we are starting here in the study / spare bedroom / now Nova's room. And of course every study needs a desk. Built in 3 hours?
We're going
Question mark?
hack and slash as fast as I can make my wife a desk because she's lost her office currently because of the baby, and we need to reinstate some of that privacy for her so she does not lose her mind. Going to go with bed slats. More bed slats. I'm thinking boxed outside frames for the legs. And some random piece of sheet good, melamine, plywood, MDF, I don't really care. It'll be literally 2 legs, top, maybe a brace, and pocket holes, of course. Break out the 720, let's hit it and see how quickly we can do this, and if we can do it before my daughter wakes up and starts demanding some attention. And as this is going to be a quick hack and slash project, I'm also using the onboard mic and we're using one lens. Looks like our depth is going to be 600, about 2 feet. And for the height, standard 900-ish, so we'll take these down to about 850.
Anyone else see a problem of making a sitting desk at 900 mils or about 3 foot? Yeah, let's think about that and keep an eye out.
870 plus the bottom plus the top, yep, that's great. Miter saw.
Where the hell did that go?
Ah. There it is. Now it seems counterintuitive, but if you're trying to work fast and efficiently, put your tools away. Where you're not tripping over things later, that couple of seconds is worth it.
And while I won't say I was absolutely perfectly clean with this build, I think I did pretty well at keeping the workspace clean and efficient while going through, and that certainly does help. So efficiency really is the whole key point of these nap time builds. And using stop blocks not only makes you faster, but it also means that all 4 of your legs will be the same length and hopefully square when you put them together.
Alright, Cutskis, how are we going? Bang on 20 minutes, including filming time. Right, very simple pocket holies.
So normally this setup works really well with the pocket hole jig, except that this time it didn't. You'll notice little dust bits flicking out at the end because I had a blockage, and I didn't notice it until basically the project was finished.
Twisted like a mofo. That one's going to need a bit more persuasion. This one should be okay. We'll do it first. Oh, a little bit as well. Yep, you get that.
So for the slightly twisted ones, I could just break out the corner clamps.
It helps. Not perfect, but it helps.
But for the other end, I'd need some more drastic measures.
Alright, no more mucking around. Let's break out the big boy. Let's get you off this. So here's my problem. That twist in there, it's maybe 5mm, so I need to pinch here and try and correct it. Spread up. Hey, I think that worked. So, I've got the twist out by putting a spreader up there. That now lines up nicely, and this one down here clamped normally, and pressure that way. Let's see if the pocket holes can hold it. Alright, see what happens. Not bad. Not bad. The whole frame's still got a bit of a twist, but hopefully we can get that out. Nice. Right, not doing myself any favours. I took one look at that and went, that's not right, that's way too high. Measured the one upstairs, I'm 100mm too tall. So I'm gonna hack it off, re-drill, rebuild. Let's do that.
And because I'm lazy, I only unscrewed one end, but it just fit back on the miter saw.
It ain't stupid if it works. That's a good clamp.
No matter how many pocket hole projects I make, I always seem to end up using mismatched thicknesses of timber, which means getting the collar set up is trickier, and the screws poke through because they're too long for the thin wood I put on the bottom. Grinder fix.
Okay, so the recut gave me a bit more stuffing around. We're about an hour and a half in. I want it to be, yeah, about that, probably a metre or 3 feet across, but it'll be dictated by the scraps of sheet goods that I have that are going across this thing. Can't use that. That's foam, that's my router table, that's my cutting board and foam again. It's good wood, it's marine ply, but it's a bit rough. That would take a bit more work than I think I'm willing to do today. Plus we've got this hole in the middle, which would not be ideal. I'm tempted, but no. Ooh. It's probably a bit small. Not wide enough. Ooh. Yeah, I think I found it. Oh, that's heavy. Why is it always the piece at the back? Perfect. Nice bit of melamine. Already edge banded. Excellent. So speaking of that bit of foam, it's my cutting board. Yeah, that's quite nice. Cut off those 2 bits. What'll that leave me with? Over a metre. Excellent. Ah, just too short. That's annoying. Take 2. She's pretty good, but you need to check. That'll do, pig. Nearly lost it. Helps with the chip out. Got a whole video on cutting melamine and various other bits and pieces. Quite popular too. Check it out. You would think that the Makita vac would plug into the Makita saw, but it does not. Bugger that, put on a mask.
Well, that went well. 2 nice cuts, very clean edges thanks to the blue tape. And then the efficiency, well, turned into rushing. Remember what I said about putting away your tools?
Still good. That was lucky. The camera didn't fare as well. Now, rather than putting on the iron on, I think I'm going to use this nice little piece of offcut that I have. But because it's so thin and needs to go through the table saw, I'm going to completely tape it up try and stop any splintering. Ooh, don't want to bow it. That's better. Can't use that, don't want to damage it. That's why we have the crap ones. That one, I don't care about it. So pushing that all the way through would have been really dangerous, very thin, and I don't need all of it, so that's more than enough. Let's see what we got. Lovely. Dotting off the ends. Oh, this is bloody plywood. Ah, you mongrel. Ah, well, it'll do. I thought it was solid timber. Looks good on the outside. Happy with that. Hashtag champ for all the things. Came up a bit high there. How'd I do that?
See, Ainsley, this is why you need a block plane. So that edging came out really nice and was the only part of the project I bothered putting some finish on. Just a bit of beeswax to protect it.
Right, how are we going? We are 2 hours 20 minutes in, 40 minutes left for my 3 hour nap time block. Let's see if we put this thing together finally. Wheels, wheels, wheels. Put everything on wheels. Alright, that's the basic idea. But I think we'll attach these upside down. Alright, how high we got? 30-something millimeter screws. So I had a tiny cleat on the end of that edge banding, which is great because it means I can line this up super easy. Helps if you screw the thing in though. Bugger me! I broke him a bit. Oh, that's a pain. Bugger. Alrighty, we could be done, but do we want to brace? I think we do. Just one straight across the back to stabilise those legs a bit. Maybe about there-ish. Yeah, let's do that. That'd be convenient. Ah, boyo. Yes. Love having scrap wood. Tape. Tape is why you put things away, because then you can find them. Oh my god, how much of a walking stereotype is that? Why did I put it up here? Put it away. 870. Yeah, twisted as... Yeah, that. Twisted as a twisted thing. So that actually wants to be out a lot. Yeah, look at that.
To save time, and because you've seen it all before, we trimmed that one down a length, drilled in the pocket holes. Easy this time because they're the same thickness. But I can't resist refilming the chamfering.
They're good. Now if I was clever I'd probably lay this on the back, but I'm stubborn and I've got it standing. So I'm going to do it this way. Because why not? Fight the gravity. Did you know gravity doesn't exist? True story. Gravity is not a force. Thwacker. Alright, Mark, one for you. Check square. Holy moly, that's actually almost square. That never happens with bed slats. Ah, square enough anyway. Take it. Now something's going on there. That's slipping. Right at the very end. Let's get some screws in there quick. You'd think after all this time, I'd know how to drive a pocket hole screw. But I still suck at it.
I swear I don't usually swear this much, but why not one more? Bugger.
Ha ha ha! There we go. Bang on 3 hours. I was rushing with the camera to set it up and get that on there. She's done! She's nearly done. I'll take that as a 3-hour win. Bit of a sand upstairs. Wifey has a temporary desk until I can afford the time to make a better one. But I'll take it. It's functional and it doesn't look like shit. Well, not quite shit. Well, here's some video inception as the 3-hour desk became my desk. My wife took her old desk back that I was using, and this one just fit better in the living room, whereas my wife needed a bit more quiet space in the other room. It's fantastic. It does exactly what it was designed to do. Someone joked in the comments that it's going to be my daughter's university desk, and honestly, it could last that long. So, yep, doesn't look pretty particularly. I could updress it a little bit, but I'm probably not going to. It serves very well for the intent it's meant to be, and I can still look after Bubba while editing. You might be able to hear it in the background. Well, this project sort of straddles between the spare room and the bathroom laundry, which will be the next section we tackle, so it fits in perfectly here. A little bit of woodwork, but mostly DIY. Something every home needs, especially a small apartment. What I have an internal clothesline. No line
actually
required.
To do for longer than I care to admit. Here is where we dry our clothes. We live in a small unit. We do have a big clothesline downstairs for sheets and towels and things, but most of the clothes are done in here on an airer. I only have limited space, so what the request is, up high to put in a clothesline so that we have a bit more capacity for drying those clothes. Not terribly exciting, but hopefully pretty functional and rather quick and inexpensive, as we are going to DIY this rather than going for a store-bought solution.
follow along. The only real restriction I had from the Wifie was that she wanted it to blend in. This is a functional thing, not a fine piece of art, so we're going to try to be very minimalistic with it. Alright, let's get to it.
And what better way to kick it off than with an error? I should have been measuring up the top where I wanted the pole to go. There was a slight difference between the floor height and the ceiling height. So here's what you're going to need. I've got myself a 3 metre long curtain rail from Bunnings, 16mm, a scrap piece of MDF, 2 white tap flanges, some white wire, wall plugs, 1 support hook, some white paint, and some silicone. I've taken my measurement, which was about 2.8 metres in my case, and transferred it to the pole. Then I knocked 0.5 centimetre off to give me a little bit of play to fit it in easier. This is where the problem was. Up top, it was actually a tiny bit wider than it was down the bottom, but luckily for me, everything still ended up fitting in well. Using my 12mm MDF, I need to make myself some circles. These are going to be the flanges, which will hold the pipe to the wall, and a 15mm Forstner bit in the middle will help me mark the center. This doesn't have to be exact. Very roughly cutting them out with the jigsaw. And drilling out the centers for an incredibly crude circle shaping jig. So I'm using my disc sander. There are lots of ways that you can create a perfect circle. This was the easiest one that came to mind. Clamping down the MDF board, nail through the middle of the circle, and slowly inching it forwards. Having just done 2 projects based around dust, I gave myself a quick uppercut and installed the vacuum, which made a big difference at sucking away that nasty MDF coming off the sander. Took them down gentle until we got the perfect fit around each of those flanges. Now it's 16mm curtain rod and I only had a 15mm Forstner bit, so I had to pull out the Dremel and do something that looks a little bit rude in order to get the pipe to fit in nicely. They need to be able to run relatively freely to aid in the installation. So a tight fit's good, but a slightly loose fit even better. There's nothing sus going on here at all. Still nothing sus. Just sanding my MDF and fitting my pole in there, that's all. Some clearance holes for the mounting. And a bit of white paint to blend it all in. Only needs to go around the edges. As usual, I'm forever dealing with brick. The good news is I can position it pretty much wherever I want. I've gone for about 45 centimeters from the wall and the same height from the ceiling as the curtain rod nearby. Breaking out the hammer drill. Get my quick plugs in. Not going to take a lot of weight this. Curtain rod's not super strong. So here's the only trick on the installation. You have to thread through both sets of flanges before you start to install it. Now I'm lucky enough to have those little shelves behind me. I could just lean the other end on to balance it, but a friend would be useful here. So with the flanges pre-threaded onto the curtain rod, I can then just drill those into the wall, and you can see that I had enough space in order to easily get the second one into position. It was almost too much space, but luckily it worked out all right in the end. So do measure up top. If it's too short, it's going to fall out. And here's the nice little finishing bit. A bit of silicone in around the gap there. Terps on a rag to clean it all up, and it looks beautiful. I drilled one last hole into the ceiling and had a bit of a boo-boo here because some of the plaster came away and I had to come back later and skim coat and repaint. That wasn't part of the plan, but some of these things just happen. A bit of white wire was the original intention. However, I found it looked a bit tacky, so I found some electrical tape in white, wrapped that around, and that looked a lot neater. Blends in lovely. Now I've got no problem reaching this, but I think I'm going to have to make a bit of a stick with a hook on it so the wifey can get the clothes up, or I'm going to be stuck doing the laundry every week.
And there you have it, all done. As you noticed in that last little shot, it is basically invisible to anyone who doesn't know it's there. If you found this useful, please do like and consider subscribing to the channel. Obviously it's usually more woodworking related, but I throw in a few handyman projects like this every now and then. Should help you out a little bit to get some more action out of your spare room in terms of the very exciting task of laundry. Another project that is handling the years very, very well. A bit dark in here, apologies, so I don't get the backlight. But the internal clothesline is one of the most used things that I've ever made. It still blends seamlessly into the roof, and I've had no issues with it pulling down on the weight, and we overload this thing. Honestly, I put towels and stuff on there that I really shouldn't, and it still looks pretty darn great. Another DIY win, and look, a really easy one and a common solution to a problem that a lot of space-starved unit dwellers have. This one's a weird but kind of cool little project. I like it. It serves a very niche need for us, but you could probably adapt it to something else in your own home.
Caddy to store a few random bits and bobs that have just been floating around our bathroom laundry. We're going to be using as few tools as possible. It is of course going to be based on Kreg pocket holes. You can use whichever jig you happen to have handy. I'm going to be using only a square cut, a circular saw, and of course a drill to get this done, along with your regular workshop consumables. We'll start by milling up my bed slat timber. You could of course buy some dimensional timber from your hardware store, but if you've got recycled stuff on hand, and as this is going to be painted, it's a nice, cheap, or free choice. Now if you've bought timber, you can of course get it in two separate thicknesses. If you are recycling like me, then put yourself a straight edge guide on the side of your circular saw and measure it out to 1/3 or 2/3 of the width of your bed slats. We effectively want that ratio. The exact width doesn't matter. I think mine are 68 millimeters to begin with. Here is a super simple little jig. It's literally just a few bits of MDF screwed down nice and square, which I can then place my bed slats on to run the edge guide of the circular saw. Very nice solution for ripping if you have a limited workshop. Naturally, if you have a miter saw and a table saw, this project would be even easier, but I'm purposely ignoring some of my larger tools to show you how this can be done in a limited type fashion. So my 4 bed slats are going to get ripped down in this manner. The wider pieces will be the legs and the rails, the skinnier pieces will be some of the bracing. Clamping together 2 bits of wood and then taking the end off using the square cut gives you a nice reference point to then measure out. These are the legs, the height that you want. The measurements in here, for which there will be free plans linked below, are arbitrary. You can size it up to whatever space you have. I think mine's about 60 centimeters high. And now by having them both clamped together, we can again pull out the square cut and very carefully chopping across, these 2 legs will be exactly the same height. Same goes for the rails, which will separate the 2 legs. To stop this from falling over, we're going to have a triangular type frame, but the square cut is not fantastic, and neither is a circular saw for smaller pieces of wood. So to get my rough dimensions at least, I'm just using a handsaw to chop these down to about 2 centimeters longer than what I actually want them. These will form the feet sticking out the front to balance out the weight of my bathroom caddy. However, if you are careful, you can use bracing blocks like I'm doing here to give yourself the support where you need the square cut to be held down nice and steady. Again, dock off the ends of both pieces simultaneously and then tap them in gently, line them up, and these 2 pieces will also be exactly the same length as well. You can get away with basic tools if you just have a quick think about a few things. This is how it's going to go together. I've got the legs on the outside, my 2 rails giving most of the structure to the frame, and then the 2 little feet which will stick out the front to provide the balance. These will all be attached with pocket holes. Now this is the K5 Kreg jig, but you don't need to have this big beast. You can have the little R3, which costs next to nothing and get you started in this hobby if you're unsure. If you really want to go into this pocket hole caper, then I love the K5. I'll link up my video of the differences between it and the K4 and why this is probably my recommended system if your budget will stretch. This clamping mechanism is one of the reasons why I like the K5 so much. Once you set everything up to the correct depth, we're using 19mm or 3/4 inch timber here today. It's a very quick process of drilling the holes, which will do the majority of our joinery. always a good idea to keep the plans on hand. I store them on my phone these days, so you can go back and check when things need to be done differently. In this case, the little sticky out leg bits are 22 millimeters, so I had to quickly reset the jig for that correct depth. Now we're just marking out, again, the arbitrary spacing for the rails. This is a specialty Craig clamp. You don't necessarily need it, though it does pay for itself very quickly. It makes life very easy when you're driving in the first screw, and then you just take the clamp out, and as it's already held in nice and tight, the second screw will be perfect. Making face frames with pocket holes like this just really is super easy, and great for a beginner who's just learning the craft. When things don't need to bear a huge amount of weight, I mean the pocket holes are pretty strong, it's my go-to choice of joinery. Checking square, whacking the screws in the other side, and then we'll repeat for the lower rail as well. Everything ends up pretty nice and square and flush, although my wood is not exactly what you'd call flat. You can see that little bend there. Doesn't bother me. We might be able to brace that out later on. There's our main frame. These ones are a little bit harder to get square when you're using the smaller style stock, but a single pocket hole in the back allows us to attach those two legs. It isn't going to stand up just yet, because we need to get the front brace in to give it the weight and the balance. The Craig Multimark is another nice little layout tool, and now we can start to do the tricky bit, the diagonal braces.
Alright, a little bit of mathematics, but I promise not too much. Now, there are planned degrees, and you could use a protractor and hope for the best, but particularly with reclaimed wood, this isn't going to be straight or exactly square. So we're going to use real-world measurements, which is why I haven't cut down the long braces just yet. I've just marked out, as you saw, my 5 centimeters, arbitrary amount, just what I thought would look good on SketchUp. And I'm going to line up this to that mark, so they're flush. And then of course this one lines up to this bottom corner. Grab your pencil, hold that down nice and steady, quick double check. And then holding your pencil or your marking knife, if you have one, as straight as possible, run a line across under there and we'll know where to cut.
Would you believe in my plans it was 73 degrees?
I'll take that.
This might be called a square cut, but that doesn't mean you can't use it for angles. It takes a little bit of brain work and fiddling around with a clamp, but once you've got a bit of practice in, then setting up these sorts of cuts might not be as accurate as a miter saw, but if you don't have one, I tell you what, she works pretty well. Again, we're going to use those real world measurements, clamping in at the bottom, and see that little extender bar? That's really helping me line it up on the outside, because this cut is going to be the trickiest one of the whole build. 17 degrees. Now that would be impossible pretty much on a miter saw anyway. So square cut's really going to show its versatility here. I've clamped both of those diagonal braces together, again using my square to line up to my real world mark. And then the camera stopped working.
Here is the setup, clamped down well, and here is a dramatic reenactment.
I quickly cut to the correct length the front brace, so it's just going to separate those 2 feet we've already attached. Nothing difficult here. Except for perhaps clamping it in position. Now I was lucky enough to have this lovely long pipe clamp. You may have to be slightly more creative, as holding this joint together square is a bit tricky. Blame the designer. But once they're in, we've finally got a caddy which will stand of its own accord. We've got that tiny 73-degree angle on this piece, and honestly, it doesn't matter. You can still use your jig to pull this joint nice and tight, drill away at 22 mils as normal. I haven't used glue up until this point, but these long miters are not the strongest joints and they are providing the structural support. So a little bit of tight bond on each end. And this is why you keep your offcuts, because it's the perfect angle for clamping in this difficult glue up joint. Nice and tight. Look at that squeeze out. Marking into the center of my 19mm stock, and you don't have to use pocket holes everywhere. Here, it was much easier, and it's the back, no one's going to see it, to whack some screws into that long 17-degree joint. You just may want to do a better job of me of measuring the length of your screws, because even though I used a shorter one up top, it still managed to poke out a tiny bit at the front, and we had to file that down. Lucky this is going to be painted. No one's going to see that pocket hole as we finish the construction and test fit in the bathroom. That wood wouldn't look terribly great though, and it's going to be on a wet surface some of the time, so I wanted to put some little rubber feet. Diving into my kit, I found these 10mm rubber doohickeys, and switching the multi-mark to 45-degree mode, I could find the center of the bottom of each of my corners, drill out the hole with a 10mm bit, and my little rubber feet would stick in there without any glue or anything. Now you can use a power sander, and I did just to clean up a few of the little boo-boos and misalignments, but honestly you don't need one, and I did the majority of the sanding with a sanding block and a good piece of sandpaper, because you know I haven't done enough sanding recently. This really doesn't take very long, just got rid of the sharp edges, grabbed my weird mesh screen which was an inspiration for this project to begin with, and fortunately it fit in there nice and snug. That's what we're pretty much going to end up with. Again, wet area, so I did make sure that I undercoated and then did 2 or 3 coats of a gloss trim paint. The whole idea here is it's minimalistic and it will blend into the background. Back upstairs, plug in our feet, and then I had these old 1980s style picture hooks, but they were going to work really nicely, so we just taparooed those in. Any hooks would do. Give them a quick coat of white, so again they don't look ugly, and we're just about done. And here is how the final project will go together. That PowerPoint was obviously one of the key indicators of design here, and the $2 shop rating yielded these lovely plastic baskets, which are going to hold all the bric-a-brac that was otherwise just sitting on the bench, like the hairdryer.
Look, this was a really odd little build, but it has been incredibly handy. It's basically storing the wife's hair straightener and hairdryer and all those bits and pieces. And yeah, it's held up really well. The feet have kept it dry. Construction is good. Absolutely no issues with it. Another little success, if a slightly odd project.
As I mentioned, our little castle is an apartment, and we don't have a lot of outdoors, which is actually ours. But of course, whenever you start home building, then your family are going to ask for assistance with their own little dominions. This sliding gate was built for my brother's place, or more correctly, for my brother's dog. Unfortunately, he has now sold that place and moved on, so I can't give you a 4-year update, but last time I was there, it was still going strong.
These poor guys have been locked up inside all day while I worked. Let's test out the gate. Maxie! Banner! Brucey! Let's go! It's literally the first thing they ran over to. What do you think, boys? Uncle James do good? Hey, Brucey. Hey, gorgeous. Hey, Banner. What do you reckon? Hey. Hey, look good? Made it for you. Hope you like it. One of the biggest carpentry style jobs they've ever done was for my family home before it was demolished. The old handrails on the veranda needed a revamp, I'll spare you that one. But more interestingly, they also needed some new steps to get down to the backyard, and so I threw my hat in the ring to have a crack at building those. And it was a challenging and fun build. At the time, I managed to salvage some of the old timbers that came off those veranda slats that had rotted through at the bottom. Little did I know that they would then become very sentimental pieces of timber going forward. We might see those a little bit later on.
I've now been able to just trace out underneath this one to get my cuts for the other stringer. And the reason that the top cut's different is because this housing joint is a lot deeper than this due to the bracket. Well, looks like we're getting there though. It's been challenging. I won't put too much more up. I might film some of the cuts, but if you want to know how to do these stairs, lots of much better resources. This is the first time I'm doing things as usual, and to learn how to do this, it does take some research. So have a crack at that before trying something like this yourself. Hopefully mine will be level. Right, so I've measured and marked out all of the mortises that I need for the steps to go into, and I'm going to use an MDF template. This is an offcut 9mm MDF. That's the mortar size I need, and then this boundary is where I actually have to cut because it's going to make up for the edge of my router. So if I trim all that out, hopefully cutting these mortises won't be terribly difficult. He says now. Alright, she's pretty rough, but these only have to be fairly rough mortises. Let's see if we can do this. You know what though? I think I'm going to get a scrap piece and do a test first. Right, well I put a straight edge along there and did some cleaning with the router. That's my test little mortise. And that's a step going into test mortise. Nice and tight. Don't break the jig after you just made it, James. Right, now we can use this to do the stringers, and that's a little bit scary. Right, that's the first mortise cut. Let's test. Snug. Having cut that first one with the router here, it was obvious that was going to be far too much effort, so I've decided to hog out most of it with a Forstner bit instead of doing the whole thing by route. Should be much faster. Great, now I can clean up the rest of it with the router and get it to the correct depth, which is about 20mm. Fortunately, that's about 18 or 19mm, so I was able just to use that height as the guide for how deep I needed to go. I also made these two blocks, which are the correct gap that I need to maintain all the way around, and that way I can put them in, line them up, and make sure that my spacing is even all the way around the mortise.
Right, so my stringers are done. I'm pretty happy with how they came out. I just need to do a little bit of tinkering on them to make sure that they're level on these very uneven bricks. But I'm going to do a dry fit first with the steps. Steps are the same 45 by 240 tread as the stringers are made out of. That's exactly 100 centimeters across there. I've gone 2 centimeters in on each side, which means I have 2.5 centimeters of wood left here, making that -5. In other words, these treads need to be 95 centimeters wide. I'm going to cut them a little bit longer than that, dry fit it all together, and then again, just make sure I can get this nice and square. Excellent. I can feel this is sloping down this way a little bit because I need to trim a tiny bit off the front there. But a tiny slope will actually be good, especially inwards, as it will help with water and give you more grip as you go on the steps. Now I'm double checking that, and it's sitting at just over 101. So I cut this 1 centimeter too long, and that was a nice double check step. Now I can trim that down to its final length, and that should be nice and square. I want to do a massive shout out to a friend of mine, Ash, who is a professional stair builder by trade and the only one of the moderators on our new group, Aussie Makers Group. Check us out at Facebook. Who knows what he's doing with wood and isn't just making it up like the rest of us. He gave me a few really good tips on this project and I'm very thankful, and one of them is called a spreader bar. So this thin piece of threaded steel galvanized rod, it's 8mm. I got to drill 2 holes under the bottom step. And what it's designed to do is basically just hold those stringers in from the side so that they can't spread, even though these are going to be screwed in, a bit of extra support. So I'm going to drill all of my holes actually, all 3 pilot holes for each step. I'm using 100mm bugle screws to put those in, and below there and there I'm going to put in the hole for this, which will just have a nut. It's going to be sunk into the other side. You have got to be effing kidding me. In my entire driver set that I got, I'd never checked because I didn't think it would happen, there isn't actually a driver bit for a bugle screw. It's a 5mm hex. I do, however, have a 5mm Allen wrench. No, I'm not going to do this by hand because I also have this little beast. Couldn't be bothered going to the shop to buy one, although I will in the future. For today, let's make our own bit. Success! That's a win. For the spreader rod, I've marked a halfway spot, about 1 inch below this bracket here. Make sure it's the same place on both sides. So I've widened those holes up just to make it a nice easy fit, and now I just got to put a countersink on this side for the nut. Because I don't have my center dot, I'm just going to make a really quick guide jig for the Forstner bit. Right, this should be one of the easier jobs. Time for assembly. All my bits are cut, all my holes are drilled, except for a little bit of piloting to do through onto the treads. Getting to the end, hopefully it all fits. Now this is the one you'd be worried about making sure it actually does go on. And I've cut these in the right direction. I think we got victory. Now, as we said, just going to extend these pilot holes into the battens as far as my drill bit will allow. I think I am actually going to countersink these. Now we test the homemade drill bit. Clutch all the way up. That's worked really nicely. Obviously impact driver would be better, but I can't use this drill bit in that impact driver. It's got the quick release on it. That looks awesome. We'll flip it over, do the other side. Decadent, but having 3 drills actually really helps. I got this one for free off Facebook. The torque on this Makita drill is amazing. It's actually wrenching my arm around getting those things in. That shouldn't fall apart. Score 1 for the homemade drill bit. Time for my rod. Beautiful. Well, that was pretty much it for assembly. Goes together nice and easy. Now we make sure it's actually flat, level and safe. Moment of truth. Oh, that's not light. Which is a good thing, I suppose. Oh yeah. Oh, booyah. That's not going anywhere. Oh. Mate, look at this. First time I've built steps, and they're pretty good. Okay, small secret time. I knew that was going to work because before I started bolting them all together, I had done a dry fit, and I did have to shave bits off here and here and here to make it work. This is real world, not YouTube magic and bullshit. I am a novice. This did take a lot of buggering around. Dad's going to come back and finish the painting. Don't know if he's going to paint these or not. There's only one little job actually, I just remembered. Apart from securing here to here, I'm just going to install the last little tread and we can call this done. Though this carpentry was fun, I sure as hell wouldn't want to do it every day. Sorry, Ash. See ya. Alright, I'll be the first one to admit this was a gag video when I put it out, but ironically it's actually helped an awful lot of people as I battled a common Australian pest, the native brush turkey that was destroying our yard. Hilariousness ensued. Join me for the war on brush turkeys. That's a problem. Because here is a male with his golden wattle around his neck, exhibiting mounding behaviour. Every springtime, they're going to build massive, stupid mounds of vegetation to attract the ladies, and they can have dozens of eggs laid in here, and they control the temperature very precisely with their beaks. Clever. Until you find one in your backyard, and they have torn up hundreds of dollars of mulch, stripped back your topsoil, and left a jolly good mess, which you then have to clean up. We've tried mirrors, we've tried palm fronds in the past. This year, it was time to get serious. It's time for the war on the brush turkey. Taking some garden snakes and some chicken wire, hammer, cable ties. Day one mostly involved flattening out his old mound. Once that was gone, we could smack some of the stakes into the ground and use the chicken wire to try and fence off the area where he liked to be.
Now, every year for the past 5 years, he has put a mound in this exact location. So the theory is that if we deny him access to there, maybe the garden can survive being raked to death.
So the easiest way I've found to attach the chicken wire to the stakes is with this stuff. It was just the piece of wire that was wrapping the chicken wire. There's a couple of meters of it, so there's heaps. Just use the little snips on there to cut off a short length. Feed it around, twist it with your fingers until you get it started. Then use the pliers to continue to twist it around until it's nice and tight and looks like that.
Even as Wifie and I put up the new defences, he came back for a fresh assault. Now, everyone's situation is going to be different of where they want to mound. We were lucky enough to have this treated pine sleeper going through the middle of it, and the little U staples came in very handy to help us complete the net. Getting a top on there is essential, or you'll just kick it over the fence. Believe it or not, these big buggers can actually fly.
Can you hear him? This is what brush turkeys do. They have incredibly powerful back legs, and they can move stupid amounts of mulch, soil, and leaf litter in a day. Like, ridiculous. If you wanted your garden cleaned, they would be the perfect employee. This is my neighbour's garden, currently getting the treatment, and he's just going to keep on cracking at it to try and get it back here. The good news is, overnight, so far, although he looks like he's landed on it at one stage, the cage is held up. And can you see this beautiful sunlight? That's why he's here. It's the only patch of garden that gets warm. He has started to mound there, so I'm going to have to rope that off as well. So that is literally overnight. We finished at 7 o'clock last night. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and he's already redone that. I think we're going to fence off his mound. If I flatten that out again, he's just got to scratch it up against the side of it. So I might just fence it in, and that way he can't. You might not be able to see him, but he's definitely kicking up dirt still up in the garden. And this is what we're trying to stop. All of this had beautiful mulch and leaf litter all over it, and the topsoil. It's just gone. He's just absolutely killed it. That watering system at the back there used to be 3 inches deep in the ground, and now he's uncovered it completely, and I'm going to have to rebury all that. This is what I mean. It looks like a lot of effort we're going to, but that single bird is costing thousands of dollars of damage to this property. They're an absolute menace. Shame they're a protected species. Anyway, here's the extension. So yesterday you can see the inner fence was there. I've now extended it out to where he prefers to mound. I'm guessing he's probably going to start mounding down here instead. That's probably just what's going to happen. Probably going to shift the problem. Out of 50 meters worth of chicken wire, that's all I've got left. Gone through nearly all of it. This area is probably about 5 meters by 4 meters. Let's go for a walk around. Anyone not familiar with my backstory, I'm the strata manager and handyman here. We do have professional gardeners, but this is just beyond the scope of their works. So the sun's still here. It's probably about midday now. It's taken me another few hours this morning. And again, this is the only patch with all these beautiful large gum trees around. I mean, we live in a beautiful place. There's actually a public park down the bottom of that, and I just wish he would go there. It's protected, probably too many screaming kids though. So this is the spot he likes and the spot we're trying to deny him access to. Not just because he's killed every plant we've put here, but because of all the damage. I'm trying to discourage him from scratching. There he is, up there. Anyway, this little section is all in. One of the things that we tried last year, see those really spiky, absolutely viciously sharp, they will go through stab-proof gloves. Trust me, I know. They come off some of those large palm trees down there. Obviously we get a lot of them. They fall off every season. We tried just covering this area with them, and it didn't work. The guy just picked them up with his strong back legs and threw them, and he ended up using them as part of his mound. So I've just used them to plug gaps underneath. He probably still could get in if he really wanted to, But the point is just to stop him from mounding. So I've left half of his mound under the net, so he's lost a lot of his resources. I don't know if that's just going to make him double up his efforts to scrounge from further afield, or maybe he'll finally get the message and try to build his mound somewhere else to impress the ladies. Dear, that's a lot of hard work. I'm pretty much out of options now. If he keeps on piling, the only thing we can do is keep on destroying his mound every day or two, which is a lot of manual labour on my part. Now, I will point out there are regulations around these guys. Once there are eggs in the nest, you're not allowed to touch them. They are a protective species. However, as long as you don't hurt the birds, you are allowed to push over the mounds. It's just he can work 24/7, and I've got 2 other jobs apart from this one to do, plus a life to live. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to let him keep scratching. We'll come back tomorrow and see what damage he's managed to do. I'm actually going to go have a cuppa and then get in my workshop and do some bloody woodwork. The war on the brush turkey, day 3. So, we've had some success. My netting looks good, and you'll notice down there, where I expected there to be a giant pile, there is nothing much this morning. A little bit of scratching, but he's obviously given up on that spot. I know he's given up on that spot, because here's the bad news. This is out the front door. What do we have here? There's the mongrel, and as soon as he sees me, he's going to bugger off, because he knows I don't like him very much. Let's take a closer look. So it seems he has decided now that up here, there he goes, is where he wants to be. Hydrangea's looking healthy. So we're going to have to sweep out this. I don't know where he thinks he's putting it. Is he kicking it down here? Some of it's going down there, so I don't know if he's trying to get it down the bottom or if he's trying to keep it up the top. All right, let's grab the rake, spread this out, see what happens next. War on brush turkeys, day 4, and first impression is good. I had to go to work today, so I couldn't keep an eye on things. That is where I thought he would start mounding, but the whole point of the mound is they like sun, and that area down through there is all pretty shady. Nothing piled up. Let's go for a quick wander. Cage integrity is fine. I'm just waiting for a giant gum tree branch to drop through it at one stage, but shouldn't be too bad. And what about back here? No, nothing down there. There's a bit of a mess there where he was scraping, but that's from the other day. And his little trail, which has not changed. He's abandoned it. For now. War is hell. But for the moment, the bird brain's beaten the bird. Let's see if he makes a comeback. I'm feeling good today. War on brush turkey, day 5. It's a glorious day. I've just come out to get rid of my veggie rubbish, and he's here. He's up there somewhere. Get rid of that in a second. But I can't see. Oh, there's maybe a little bit piled up there. Not a lot. I've really taken away a lot of his ammunition. There's not a lot of scratchings left because he'd already done so much damage. Where is he? No, the cage looks good. There he is. You can't see him, he's in the shadow of the magnolia. So he's still here. He still lives here. They're very territorial. There's maybe a little bit down there. Not a lot. There he goes. He really doesn't like me. Australian bin chickens. Oh, he's running. But honestly, not much damage. He's got a lovely day. And he is still hanging around. But so far so good still. Quick check over here.
No, I don't think that's changed much. It's just the crap you put the other day. Alright, I've got to work tonight, but we'll see how this looks in the morning.
So I've literally just gotten up this morning to make my coffee. And outside the kitchen window, he's stalking me. He's literally set up camp outside my window, staring at me. Sorry, mate, but I've won.
War on Brush Turkey's day 8. There hasn't been an update for a few days because there has been no activity, and I am claiming victory. Let's see how it looks. So this is my cage setup. Still good. Brush Turkey is still poking around somewhere, scratching for grubs, but he's given up. He's not putting any more effort in.
We interrupt this gloating broadcast to bring you some important news from the future. Bugger.
We're back outside in the garden. You know what that means. He's back. War on Brush Turkeys, about 2 weeks in. Interesting development. The cage is holding. There's not exactly what you'd call a lot of mess around here. There's maybe a tiny bit there. But he's up there scratching. I don't know where he thinks he's pushing it. Let's go have a look. Yeah, he sees me coming. There he goes up the steps. He still knows that I'm not a fan of him. And there's the old mound, still fenced off. I think he's gotten in there. Or maybe he has. I reckon he has gotten in there. I reckon he has. I reckon he has got in under that fence. Look at that gap he's kicked. He's moved my palm branches out of the way and somehow managed to scratch up a little bit of the mound in there. Oh, I don't like that. Gonna have to fix it. Not gonna serve him any bloody good. Cheeky bastard. There he is. Better go plug that hole. Because, yep, I think that is remounding. He's managed to scratch a little bit in under the fence. Right, so I knew it was the weak point. I just had a few of these palm fronds in here blocking a gap large enough for me to get under. So it's not surprising he was able to kick them out of the way and get on in and re-establish a very, very small mound, which I've now just used the backhoe to get rid of. So I did have, where is it? Oh, I left it over there. I have got some more wire. So we're going to get the chicken wire in and block out this last little access section, hopefully. Okie dokie. I've re-flattened out what I think he managed to scratch up again. Seems how it's all dirt now. I'll be able to tell if he gets it in the future. And a big gap that was under the fence here, I have now netted off. So that was a flaw. It held him out for about 2 weeks. Just got some more tacks in to the woodwork there. And I'm going to throw more of these vicious, bloody, spiky palm branches on top of it as well. Hopefully that holds for another few weeks. So it was about $160 worth of material and 5 or 6 hours of labour, but that will be reusable. I can pull it down at the end of the season, probably take an hour or so, store it away, and then next year I can bring it back again. So I hope this was useful to some people, and the bird can be beaten. Yeah. Well, as you can tell by the amount of leaf litter here, and we are in late spring, early summer, the peak breeding season, we won. We are several years on, and what used to be a sunny patch of moundy badness is now well and truly shaded and overgrown. The fence did its job. It needs to be pulled out. It is rotted through. I mean, they were never protected, and it's been there 3 years now, I think. And the chicken wire is all still hidden in there. It's covered in leaf litter. The monsteras here have grown over it entirely, as well as the jasmine, which we planted. You can see it climbing up and over things there as well. So we do need to do some rejuvenation of the area. Because if we come around to the other side, we can see, yes, that jasmine has well and truly taken over.
So I might just clean it up. I may leave the chicken wire underneath because that's what's holding that sort of frame up. And when it flowers, it will be nice. It's just all of the rubbish that falls off the gum trees that makes it a wee bit ugly. Now, don't get me wrong. While I did enjoy victory over the bird brain, we did not necessarily become lifelong arch nemesis. Because if we walk on down here, you'll start to notice some very clean steps, which I guarantee you the council do not clean on the way to our little park. Because all the mulch ends up there, right there. That is his mound. It's been there for 3 seasons now, I think, ever since I moved him on from our garden. We've not had him scratch up anymore. And while it was a really silly video, it was very popular now. There's a lot of people every September in Australia who search up that solution, and I hope it genuinely helps people, despite it being a bit of a laugh. And then last week, something even funnier happened. I was contacted by these lovely people, Kate and Joel Temple, who write children's books. And they informed me they would like to send me out a copy of their book on the bush turkey / brush turkey. Because when they were researching it, they actually found my video on YouTube, and it has provided some of the inspiration for the main character in this story. Tell me if you think this guy looks just a little bit familiar. It was an absolutely hilarious shock that I, Fixit Fingers, am now the second main character behind the bird himself in a children's story, partially inspired by the war on brush turkeys. This YouTube thing is absolutely crazy. You never know where it's going to go. So that's one for Mum and Dad, one for my brother. I suppose I better do a job for my sister's family as well. And it wasn't my best work, but luckily I had some help. Thank God for Uncle Knackers.
Except I've never done it before. And that's what this video is going to be about. It is not a how-to, because I learned a hell of a lot along the way and made a lot of mistakes, which I'm going to share with you. This is a first-time experience and me encouraging you to have a crack. You can get an acceptable result, as long as you're a little bit careful. More careful than me anyway. But as I didn't know what I was doing, I checked in with someone who does, and popped straight over to YouTube to check out my mate Shane from DIY for Knuckleheads. He's a builder, and he knows a thing or two about coping and skirting boards.
Ever wondered how to do those pesky internal corners on your skirting boards? So what do you need? First of all, a coping saw. You'll also need a compound miter saw, which is one of these babies.
See, now the thing is, my miter saw weighs an absolute ton. It's like 36 kilos, so that's 80 or 90 pounds, I think. It doesn't move easily, it is bolted to my bench, it's lined up nicely, so I made the executive decision not to bring it. That's gonna come back to bite me. I also don't own a coping saw, which are really cheap, affordable absolutely everywhere, and could have been acquired in about 5 minutes at my local big box shop, but I decided, nah, I'm gonna use a circular saw and a jigsaw, because more power's better, right? No, it's not. So this is what we're dealing with. I only have that single external corner, but about 5 of these internal corners because of the built-in wardrobe and things. I also have 2 different surfaces, that lovely 1970s wood shiplap paneling and regular old plasterboard. The wood's not too difficult, the plasterboard was trickier for me. Step 1, removing the old cedar skirting boards. There were not too many tack nails in here, mostly it was adhesive, so I had to run all the way along the edges trying to find the dollops of glue that were holding these wooden boards to the plasterboard and try and break all of them off so that I could then lever very carefully the old skirting boards off. These weren't going to be reused, we had some nice shiny new ones my brother-in-law had picked up from the big box store. So after I'd broken all the adhesive, I was trying to get a screwdriver under there, and then we found an old curtain rail that had a hook on it. A jemmy bar would be better, but this actually worked surprisingly well. And I was able to very gently pry away the old board without too much damage. These boards were running the whole length of the wall, and so you don't bash them into things. Once you've freed them, just get a small saw and cut them in half. It's so much easier to handle that way. And as you can see, I got most of the glue off.
But yeah, we missed one or two and ended up taking a few chunks out of the wall. So do double check or you will be damaging your plaster a lot and have to patch that hole. And of course, even though most of the glue came off, some of it was still there. So the new one would sit flush. Get your scraper, go along the wall, and try to make that as flat as you can. Make sure you suck up all the debris with the vac. Pulled out the spack filler, quick drying stuff. You're never going to see this, but I thought it best to fill the holes. And no, that was not the last time I was going to need spack filler for the day. Now on the plaster, another tool I was missing was a stud finder. When you put your tack nails in, you want to put them into the wooden beam behind the plaster, and that's not everywhere. So I just used the back of my awl, listened very carefully, and found the solid bits, which were going to be the studs, and then marked those out with tape. Now typically, I think they were meant to be 300mm apart or something like that, and some of them were. And many of them weren't. I am not sure who built this place. It may have been owner built, and for whatever reason, the spacings of the studs were absolutely all over the shop. But I think I found most of them. Here is something ripped directly off Shane from DIY for Knuckleheads. Again, go check him out if you haven't already. He's an absolute champion. The bottom of your plasterboards often curves in, and you'll find that when you put a square up against there, that it's not going to be level with the rest of the wall. So Shane suggested putting a little nail, little clout in here, because you'll see when I'm putting the new board up, down the bottom, there's going to be movement, which is going to kick it inwards. So in the corners, to avoid that kick, just put that little space of a nail head, and it'll make them sit closer to 90 degrees. Great tip, knackers! See, this is where you should be using a miter saw. This cut's not too bad. Circular saws do 90-degree cuts very well. Try to have the piece supported on both sides, or have a friend holding the other end, when you are trimming down the pieces to length. You'll notice that on this first piece, we are trimming it at 90 degrees. Pick the wall that your eye is going to be drawn to, and this one you can safely cut off perfectly square. You'll see why in a moment. Then, because I hate the next person who's going to come in and renovate this place, I decided to use far too much liquid nails on the back of my new skirting boards, because I did not want these to come off or peel away from the wall. Once the adhesive was there, I checked my level and ensured that with my little tack gun, we got in on those studs that we marked out earlier to hold everything nice and tight. I'm not going to show it in this video. It will be my brother-in-law's job to come back later, fill those holes, and touch up his lovely paint job. He did pre-paint these skirting boards, which will save a lot of backbreaking work at ground level later on. I think it's easier to do that and just fix up the damage you do installing them than it is to paint the damn things while they're in place. Now we're starting to see some of the struggles that you will have if you, like me, don't bring yourself a miter saw. I am trying to cut a 45-degree scarfing joint. A scarfing joint is when the boards are not long enough to run the full length of the wall and you need to join two of them. Now, if you're clever, you might be able to position that joint behind a piece of furniture or the bed or something, and of course you want to have that joint right on one of the studs. You cut an open 45 and a closed 45, and it looks like this. Where did I go wrong, Shane?
James, listen up, as I'm only going to tell you this once. Don't use a circular saw to cut your scarfing joints or your internal corners on your skirting boards, as it's just not accurate enough and you'll finish up with a dog's breakfast.
For reference, here's a perfectly good scarfing joint that I cut when I was building my lovely workbench back in the workshop. The circular saw, mind the pun, just won't cut it. Use a miter saw. While we contemplate that horrendousness, if you'd like to see some good woodworking, then I highly recommend Barber's Paddock Woodworking. Anthony only started the hobby and making videos relatively recently, and already the quality of his production and his woodwork, I believe, exceeds my own. He also became a top tier member of the Fixit Fingers channel recently, and for that he gets this shout out. There is a link below if you would like to join up and get into the action as well. Thank you so much for that, mate. Go give him a subscription, you will not be disappointed. Okay, now the main event and the scariest part of skirting board installation, coping the internal corners. Shane's video goes through this in the detail that you need to do this successfully. I understood it in theory, the execution was something else. Short version, do an open 45 cut on the board you want to slide into the corner. Make a 90-degree cut along the flat section of your moulding. And then this is where you should be using a coping saw. So what you are attempting to do is to follow that lip of the open cut along the tricky moulding section, undercutting it slightly. The jigsaw does work, and after I practiced 4 or 5 of them, I was getting okay at it. But I do think that for a beginner particularly, the little hand coping saw is going to be much easier and give you better results.
So let's cross back to Uncle Knackers and see exactly how a professional would do this job.
Now the best way to do it, which is used by carpenters all over the world, is just to use your miter saw, which will give you a beautiful straight cut, and then finish it off with a coping saw for all those fancy bits. Just set your saw to 45 degrees and away you go. And boom. That's how you do it, mate. Forget that circular saw business. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
Cheers, Uncle Knackers. Well, I'll keep that one away for next time, but here is the result I was able to achieve with my circ saw and jigsaw. Not as pretty, but I'll take it in this circumstance. Let's just say my brother-in-law measured very well, as they are the only offcuts that I had left at the end of the job. I only had the one external corner to do, and it was a simple 45 job that looked like that. It came out acceptable. The rest of it was okay. My horrible scarf joint notwithstanding, it was a great improvement on the old stuff. For your reference, even though I was filming a bit, this job took me 6 hours to do, so most of a day. With the proper tools and a bit of practice, I'm sure you can cut that down immensely. But for me, I'll take this as a learning experience, and I hope some of my stuff-ups will assist you if you ever attempt this job in your place, and you'll be aware of some of the shortcuts to avoid. One of the best things I find about DIYing your personal space is customizing it to how you want it. I couldn't find or buy a product to do what I needed in this location, so I made one. Not too difficult, but one of my prettiest projects for improving our home. Behind our front door, we've got a mirror, and under that mirror is a lovely convenient space for a coat/key rack, which I'm going to trick out a little bit by also adding a wireless charging unit for the mobile phones. I haven't made a full solid hardwood project in a while, and I certainly have not made one from reclaimed timber where things actually need to be kind of square. With only hand tools at my disposal really, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. However, I will start by docking everything down and cutting the rough length on my one big power tool, the lovely Bosch miter saw. Then it's over to the DIY 3-inch jointer to try and get a square edge on 2 sides. Fortunately, these boards were right at the exact width I can handle, and in a few passes we had them looking a bit prettier. No idea what timber it is, but if I had to guess, I think it's blackbutt. All I know is it was bloody heavy and tough as nails. Speaking of homemade tools, I haven't broke this one out in a while. It's my homemade table saw. This was just a prototype model, and so I'd never really gone on to build my full plans yet. However, as you can see, with stock this size, it actually worked quite well. Resawing, however, is not something that table saw is capable of effectively, so I pulled out the Triton and got a jig going with the edge guide to get these boards most of the way through. Didn't quite have the capacity, but no worries, because the Ryoba allowed me to very quickly finish off the cut. This took my stock down to about 22mm, thereabouts. My target was 19 or 3/4 of an inch. But to do that, I'm going to need a thicknesser, which I also don't have. So it was time to slice up some scrap form ply to improve my old router sled.
So this is my thicknesser.
my new thicknesser. I had a little sled, but this one, which has got some T-nuts here holding it down to the workbench and a lot more travel, is going to do me quite well. There's only one problem. I find myself enjoying making these sort of hacked up, rubbish looking jigs out of scrap. Then often I do working on the project that I'm supposed to be working on, which is going to look pretty, maybe, at the end of it. Yeah, well, it's all woodwork.
With that knocked up and some relatively flat sides from the jointer, I'm using my router now to pass out about 2mm to really get a nice finish side. Some sanding and it was time for the glue up. Except in my milling process, I realised that I've gone a bit thin and lost a bit more on the edge jointing than I intended. No matter though, it was one of those feck up to feature times, as I got a piece of the old Meranti from my parents' veranda demolition, which I did last year, and that gave me the extra width I needed, added a nice contrasting piece of wood, and on top of that, meant I now have part of my grandfather's place and my parents' place into this build, which is quite nice. AccuCut ripped me down a nice piece that was thin enough to get the width I needed. I haven't actually glued up a hardwood panel like this for a very, very long time. Fortunately just the one today. Very impressed with how my jointer worked, got a nice straight bit of squeeze out there. Couple of cawls on the end, I could leave that overnight to dry. Close enough to flat for me, and I love that contrasting stripe in the middle. I did most of my sanding now, but would have to do some more a little bit later on. Right, so Wifie uses some makeup and things at the mirror behind the door, and so I wanted a few little trays. They're very, very shallow, and again, the router sled came to the rescue. I've actually clamped my router base in place there, so I can just drag it slowly like you see to do the vertical lines, and now I've clamped the sled in place here to do the horizontal lines. That's just giving me the outline of 3 shallow little trays. Then I could come back with a 19mm bit set to the same depth and hog out all the middle by hand nice and easily. The Dremel sandpaper eraser got rid of the router burn marks, and I could finally cut it down to length back at the miter saw. My mate gave me one of these lovely little wireless chargers, naked one, ooh, which I was going to have to mortise in very, very thinly. This was going to be the trickiest part of the build. Here I am just getting the rough depth and making sure that I've got my dimensions correct. Then I had to take it all the way down to about 2.5mm or 1/8 of an inch. Through the glare, you can just see we've achieved that, but God, that router sled has absolutely been the savior on this particular build. CNC would have been nice, but this got me through. Even had to break out the chisels. Watch out, dodgy hand tool usage. But I did a lot of shaping and fiddling around with that mortise and chisels just to get everything fitting. I decided I did want to put a cap over the top. These wireless chargers don't generate any heat at all, basically. And seeing as how I had a nice tight fit for the cap, I could just use the router sled again to bring it down to the exact correct thickness. That cap was actually the thin offcut that I did when resawing the boards. I chopped down some screws to be very, very small and secured them in place.
So I've just spent all afternoon cutting out this mortise, and my greatest fear was being able to get this thin enough that the wireless charger will work. That's only about 2.5mm, and I was really worried. I tested it and it's fantastic. It does charge. And then I did this. The mortise is on the right side, but this is the front of the coat rack. And that's where I've put the cord exit instead of out the back. Oh my God, that is bloody frustrating. I can just plug that up, but measure twice, cut once. Right, Dirk and Chris? Smeg.
So I need the back to be removable in case I ever need to get the cord for the charger out again. So I'm going to use pocket holes, and I'm cutting a very small rebate here just to hide that joinery a little bit. And you can see I cut the new trench too. Took a moment just to start on the backing board now, but my screws were too long that came with my lovely hooks. Here's a good trick. When you need to cut them down, You don't want to lose that sharp little end bit of the screw, so pop it in the bag, give it a good squeeze with the pliers, and you will save it from flying across the room or in your eye. Sandpaper on the Dremel gives me the point back on the screw, and then I can mark out and drill my holes. They won't be installed till right at the end though. Actually quite a bit going on this backing board. There are going to be 4 pocket holes, 2 key holes, and of course a trench down the middle for the cable, which I don't want hitting those screws. So it was very important to mark everything out carefully before going over to the K5 and getting my 5 mounting holes in. Then it was time for something kind of tricky.
Okay, not claiming I invented this because I'm sure everything woodworking's been done before, but I just spent about an hour figuring this out. Almost Cuffy level mathematics. Follow along. So what I want is a dowel that goes in here on the correct angle in order to act as a support brace from here to the back. To do that, I'm going to use my pocket hole jig. Pocket holes cut at 15 degrees. What I need, figured out, is 25 degrees. So if I can add an extra 10 degree to my pocket hole, I should be able to get this dowel hole at the exact correct angle to go up into there like that. So first we'll just mark it out. That'll put it 10mm from the edge. So over at the miter saw, I've cut these 2 blocks at 10 degrees. Block, adding 10 degrees. In goes the board, resting up against the block, clamping down and lining my mark up with the C hole until that touches. Counter wedge, clamp down. So that should be a repeatable cut. Now the last trick, that's a regular 9.5mm drill bit, because I don't want that little bit at the end of the pocket hole jamming through the front of my wood. I want a flat-ish bottom for the dowel. I should come through only that far. Wish me luck. And now we pray that worked. Didn't come through the front. Looking pretty nicely positioned there. 9.5mm dowel. Backing board. Bloody lovely. This hole's going to be a lot easier. That was the tricky one. Chuffed.
With those 25 degree ones perfect, the back ones had to be 65 degrees, but they were shallow enough I could just freehand them. Now there's not going to be any glue in this side, these just need to be a resting point effectively for those braces so I can still remove that backboard at will. Just need to trim those dowels down a little bit and do the Townsville shuffle, check and square till it all looks good. Powering along now, that's the relief channel for the cable at the back. And then as we mentioned, this will be held to the wall with 2 keyholes. I like the Craig screws for this because they got the nice wide pan head. Now it was time to start sanding properly. I went all the way to 320 with this, and because the wireless charge is a little bit finicky as to where you need to put the foam, I've carved a small lightning bolt in the top so that you know where to dump it. While I had the Dremel out, less than elegant signing of the maker's mark on the back, but no one will see this, so my childish 5-year-old handwriting will do. This is not the finish, this is the Feast Watson sanding sealer, which I have done a review video on why I use it, but you can already see the colours starting to pop. The support dowels, I wanted to be black to match the metal on the mirror, so it got a few coats of sanding sealer, followed up by some proof tint also in the Feast Watson, which was very handy too for doing some staining on the carvings. There are all the pieces. Bit complicated for a simple build, but we got there in the end. Final assembly time, and about the only glue going on this were supporting the dowels to the main body, because as we said, that back needs to be removable. And we can finally drive the pocket holes home, just to test the final appearance and get it ready for its actual finish, which would be Danish oil. It was about this point that I realised my Danish oil, which I have stored in a jam jar, had pretty much turned to Danish jelly. Not as airtight as I would have hoped, sadly. I decided to save it to save myself a few dollars, being the tight ass that I am, poured in some terps, gave it a stir, and tested on the back cover for the wireless charger, and wouldn't you bloody know it, it actually still worked. A bit more fussy to use because you had to rub it in very, very well, but at least I ain't tipping it down the drain. But yeah, storing your Danish oil in a jam jar, I wouldn't recommend. It's been there about a month, still usable, but it'll probably go in the bin then. After 2 coats of that, it was time for some beeswax finish. Screw on my lovely hooks and install the wireless charger. Now, I just had double-sided tape on it to begin with, but I actually had to go back and use some screws because that wasn't holding very well. And here you can see why I needed the removable back. Locking it down, and we're ready to install. Might also note the nice dodgy little repair I did on my failed cord slot. To ensure I drilled the holes in my living room wall in the correct place, I did a full trace using baking paper, marking where the top of the keyholes would be, as that's where the drill bit needs to go on. Took it upstairs with the hammer drill, used the awl to mark it out, and installed a few little greenie plugs. Doesn't need to take much weight, this. They should be more than strong enough. Again, I like the panhead Craig screws for these sorts of mounts. Took off the mirror to get it in place correctly. And around this time, I was super happy not only with how my drilling went, so that the mirror sat dead flush with the new coat rack, but also how nicely the black butt actually managed to, completely by accident, match the mango wood that is on the mirror. This cable organizer from Bunnings is super cheap and it just really made such a difference. It looks so nice. Plug her in, give her a test. Power.
Well, there you have it all done. As I am utilising the space behind my front door, I've had to put an extra long door stop down the bottom to make sure it doesn't get bashed as that door opens. But otherwise, for what was meant to be a fairly simple project, there was quite a lot going on, a bit more than I expected. But I'm really, really happy with this, and Wifie now has a place to do her makeup in the morning, and we can store all the bits and pieces that otherwise collect around the living room in a much more organised and lovely fashion. Don't you hate filming with the mirror? Here is the station. It still works quite nicely, plugged in down there. My drunken octopus hooks are fantastic. The little error here, nobody actually picked up on ever so far, and the blend into the existing mirror was super cool, and this is used every day as well. These DIY projects for the home, it really does make the place. It looks like it's meant to be there. It's incredibly practical, and you know, I've even thought of extending it a little bit further here, but time is time. Extremely happy with my wireless charging coat rack hanger.
The one true outdoor space that is our own here at Kinvara is mostly the domain of my wife. I got the workshop, she got the balcony. And there are a number of projects that go along with that, including this mildly illicit one.
And moving on. Everything in here is pretty much a bed slat, all reclaimed off the side of the road. Very simple construction, hacking together this mildly illegal wee wagon, but we ain't going to leave it ugly. Cutting off the corners at 45 gives us an octagon, which last time I checked needed a 22.5 degree bevel on the little trim pieces to make them fit lovely. Marking out where the brads are going to go, bit of glue, couple of clamps. Smack smack fire action. And trimming down the corners to fit nice and snug. Can't be crude, got to give it a quick sand. Smack some feet, counter board on one end. Pull out the Wagner, that's pretty much real time. And why not add some bling with an offcut of the Tassie Oak ukulele stand to make a little handle for the other end. Appropriate, as they're both wifey projects. Drum sander in the drill, coat of Danish oil. Attach two little casters at the other end for easy mobility. Bolt down that beautiful Tassie Oak handle onto the lovely Mission Brown wee wagon. Couple of dowels, just cause why the hell not? And bangski, she's all done. And why have we risked the law's wrath by propagating weed, I hear you say?
Weeds!
Well, that would be thanks to this fuzzball. Bon appetit, little mousey. Bon appetit. Not bad for scrapwood and a couple of hours work. Mousey likes it. How about you guys?
Nearly forgot this one. Here it is. The Weed Wagon. And yes, sadly, a couple of years later, we lost our poor little guineas, and they have been laid to rest, and the weed wagon got emptied because we didn't need the illegal weed anymore. We also don't have any plants big enough that really need it for the moment, but it is being kept in there, and, you know, it was pallet wood. It was made in about an hour, and it did very well, and it will probably find a new home eventually. Don't throw them out. Still good. Ha! Bonus random project. This is literally a piece of packing pallet, and all I had to do was cut it down, and I stuck some foam underneath so it doesn't damage the new air conditioner. And yeah, another packing bench there. This one we got for free. Found that in the gutter. Literally, nothing needed to be done. Not every DIY project got a video. In Australia, some of our native timber species, which we like to call wood, other parts of the world would probably call concrete. Spotted gum is one of those, and so what did I decide to do? Make an indestructible garden bench with some storage crates over 2 videos for the lovely wife. It hurt.
If you have one of these miter
Mostly
saws,
my tools.
then your life is going to be a lot more fun. Using a stop block is going to help you get repeatable lengths, and if you find that you don't quite have the space in order to get the long pieces of decking on the miter saw straight up, you can always cut down a rough length on your circular saw using the Craig square cut, and then slipping up your stop block, you'll be able to get more manageable pieces. This will also help you eliminate as much waste as possible. Now, spotted gum is not a material I have used before, and it is like concrete. If you have a check on the Yanker scale here, you will see that it is up there. It's going to be punishment on your tools, so keep that in mind if you're going to copy, or do the smarter thing and perhaps find yourself a slightly softer material. So following my plans, I've cut out the pieces for the legs, the stretchers, the braces, and these really long pieces are going to be the top slats. Now, they're not exact length just yet. We'll trim those down right at the very end. Very little ripping needed, but just like last time, here is my ripping jig. First, I'll put a nick in it to make sure that I am exactly halfway in between that board. These thinner pieces are going to form little L shapes to give strength to my leg assemblies. Even if the wood is really hard, your saw will be able to do it. Just go slow. Running the blade through, and we get half and halves quite nicely.
Well, the miter saw certainly made that a lot easier than just using the square cut like the last project. Now it's time to focus on the top. So what we're going to do is edge joint these boards. And I'm going to try a method that I haven't used before. I'm going to use the Craig jig to use the screws as clamps effectively. Going to put some waterproof glue in here, but I'm not actually going to do anything to these edges and hope they hold together. I don't have the table saw and I don't have the jointer set up for these really long pieces, so we're going to keep it nice and easy. Before we do that though, there's a few things we have to look at with the top. The end grain. This is mostly flat saw. In other words, the rings are finishing pretty much on either side. Most of your decking material is going to look like this. However, it's going to have a tendency to want to cup in the direction of the grain. So that's going to get higher and that's going to get lower. In order to counterbalance that, we want opposing grain so that when this one tries to bend this way and this one tries to bend this way, that they end up cancelling each other out a little bit. This one here needs to go over. And rechecking the face, fortunately that face is quite nice, so we're going there, 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 and this one's going to need to go over too, which is going to give me the ugly face. So I might have another play with that, but I'd rather have this pattern looking good and these have a bit of extra sanding than have to deal with cupping in the top later on. Now that's all sorted out, we put a carpenter's triangle so we can put these back in the right order and flip them over because importantly we want the pocket holes in the back. I space mine out roughly every 20 centimeters, thereabouts.
These cuts were the toughest ones and they nearly destroyed my drill bit, to be honest. Going across the grain on these boards was very, very difficult. The drill bit heated up a lot. I had to give it time to cool down in between the planks. So again, choice of material, maybe not ideal, but at least we know this thing will last a very long time once she's done. When you're going through hard material like this, just take it easy. Make sure you retract the drill bit to ensure the vacuum has enough time to pull out the swath and your life will go easier. Now this is the only edge jointing I did. I just did a bit of sanding and cleaned up the little furries on the side of the pocket holes because a slightly blunted drill bit is going to leave those behind. Here is another piece of necessity only because of the toughness of my material. My mate Kilby at Run the Grain gave me this great tip. Get a really long 3mm drill bit and you will have to pre-drill your pocket holes. Now this is not something that you would normally ever see done because the screws are self-tapping. But I did a lot of tests. It wasn't safe enough to drive without pre-drilling because I was just getting split outs 50% of the time. I did a Mervo gate for my brother and I did not pre-drill once and I didn't have a single issue with that, and it's a pretty tough wood too, but it just shows you have to work to your material, and pocket holes and spotted gum don't seem to be the best friends. However, it is coming along quite nicely, and as we pull out the polyurethane glue, because it's about the only thing that will stick to this spotted gum, it's quite an oily timber. The regular PVA based glues will not work very well. Lastly, it is essential that you use the fine threaded screws or you will have no hope in hardwood. Look for the F on the box. So the glue will keep the water out, screws will act as clamps, and even though they haven't been edge jointed, I'm hopeful they're going to stay together nice and tight.
Now here's the real beauty. You take the clamps off. Oh, that weighs a ton. It's a learning experience with a spotted gum. Not sure if I'll do it again, but it's working okay.
Now, polyurethane glue has the nasty habit of expanding an awful lot. So we get out the awl and we run it along the gap in a very satisfying globular gathering glue extraction exercise. And this was actually far too much fun. I just kept going back for more. It's like scratching off boogers. Ooh yeah. Now, even if you do this several times with the Metho to lubricate, you're going to find that once it dries, you'll have to come back another time, but you'll have a lot less to do if you get rid of most of it as it bubbles up slowly. Switching to the rails and this more traditional placement of pocket holes, it was heaps easier to drive through these holes, and in the middle piece, I did something tricky and put them on both sides, just for funsies. Putting the leg assemblies together, they're getting the cross-grain drills as well and went back to being tough. Now, on my design, you are going to have a little bit of a tiny lip on the edge there, but it didn't really affect it and you won't see them in the final product. If you had slightly thicker boards, mine were 86mm. If you had a 90mm board, I reckon you'd probably just about get away with not having that little half circle on the top. Here are my leg assemblies going together. Pre-drilling again, just to make sure we don't get any splits. And this is really important. Make sure you have the clutch turned on and you're on screwdriver mode on your drill. Do not use an impact driver. It will overdrive and you will again probably get splits in your wood. So learn to use the clutch. Mine was on about a number 8. Breaking out the right angle clamp, and these leg assemblies went together in absolutely no time at all. So we've got 2 for the ends, check square, and then the one for the middle, which I turned into a T section instead of an L section to keep everything nice and balanced. Get creative with your clamping, and then if you want, you can use a router just to take off the sharp edges. So I put the sharp edge from the rip cut on the outside and then rounded that over on my leg pieces to keep them nice and handleable. Once you've got all that done, it actually comes together really, really quickly. But to make it even faster, when I ran out of screws and had to pop into Carbotech to grab some more, I also picked up myself these nifty little corner clamps, also from Craig, of course, and I've wanted them for a long time, and this project finally gave me the excuse to pick them up. Geez, they make this part of assembly, which otherwise would be a really tricky clamping job, almost instantaneous. Something else I don't use terribly often is the little block here. It comes with the master kit in the K4 and the K5, and it's designed to let you do this. Now, I was just figuring out as I go how I was going to attach the top, and I decided that a single pocket hole in the middle and using these figure 8 clips on the outside was the way to go. This is because my solid panel is going to move. It will expand and contract with the temperature and the seasons, so having these slightly movable clips on the outside will allow them to do this, and anchored by the central pocket hole, which will hold it steady in the middle. So the pocket holes are really the strength, and those figure 8 clips are going to give it the flexibility so that things don't start cracking and pulling apart as the wood moves over time. With the leg assembly all done, we can return our attention to the top, scratch away the rest of the polyurethane glue, and I have absolutely no idea what's going on here, far too much sanding for this little Fixit Fingers. At Carbotech, I also picked up these track clamps for my AccuCut, and they're very handy in situations such as this, where the track is far too long to safely balance on my little table, but I did want to take off and square up the end there, and the clamp is holding that down really nicely. One thing that would also help is setting your circular saw to the correct depth, because on this first pass I was about 1.5 millimeters too shallow. No worries, quick check, fix it up, bang it through, and we'll have a couple of square ends on this bench seat. There'll just be a tiny overhang on the design. Now it is outdoor furniture, and I decided to go with some Aquadeck. It needs to be reapplied every year, but it's super easy to put on, and you can always touch it up whenever you want to if you're experiencing a bit of weather. To keep the end grain out of the water that gathers on the balcony after heavy rain, I put on some plastic feet, installed my figure 8s to hold on the top. Make sure you back them off 1/4 of a turn after you've screwed them in tight. Position the legs on top of the upside down table just as we like it. Finish installing the figure 8s, which I like to do by hand, again, just to control the tension on those screws so they're not too tight. And lastly, lock it down with the pocket holes in the center. Alright, she's all together, but we're not done just yet. While you're enjoying these beauty shots, keep a look underneath, because next week we're going to finish off this project with a few rolling storage carts. So we've got a bench seat to begin with, but Wifie does want to have some soil and things put away safely, and that will be the next part of this project. The milling process for this is pretty much identical as the last one, so I won't go into it too much. This is all 19mm decking, and that is spotted gum, which will make up the pretty faces of these crates. However, I'm going to cheat here to save money and weight by making the sides, which I'm measuring out right there, and the backs out of this 19mm pine. So this worked out really well in the end. I'm glad that I did do it. Marking out the pine is identical to marking out the other components, and we'll chop those down on the drop saw as well. Now, of course, you can just use your circular saw and square cut for this, just like I did on an earlier build, but with the number of bits of material needed for this, there's a huge amount of wood in crates, much more than I'd ever believe. Having a chop saw is definitely a great idea. Measuring the right way helps too. So they're all the back pieces, which are identical to the fronts, of course, and then moving the stop block in to have the side rails. Again, I could just do all of these right up at the front, making this a nice, easy stage of the build. And would you take a look at all the material going into 2 rolling crates? It's nearly as much as the bloody bench itself. Not too much ripping, but down the bottom, just because of the height that those crates are going to need to be, I did work out I'd require one of the slats to be at half height. So that's what we're doing here, chopping the pine sides, backs, and the front of the spotted gum. Now for the summer build series, you're going to be seeing people making stuff that means summer to them. And summer for Wifie and I is breakfast, brunch, sometimes lunch, on the balcony. And we've not really had a very comfortable place to do that. So this bench seat is going to be great for that, and also summer for Wifie in particular means gardening season. and these big storage crates are going to be used to store her soil, tools, and a few other bits and pieces, really neaten the place up. So with the wide ones, I use the A and the C hole, but here with the narrow ones, you'll see conveniently, you've got the B and C hole, which gives you a consistent spacing on all of these slats. Pocket hole construction, of course, in this Craig series, is going to make my life really easy. Ripping those pieces in half, however, has given me a sharp edge. Now, I'm going to use the fence as a guide for rounding over these pieces on my router table. If you don't have a router or a router table, you can just use sandpaper or a hand plane or something along those lines. But as there's quite a few of these to go, the router with a 5mm round over bit in it did make very quick work of those edges. Here's a nice close-up, only subtle, but enough to stop you from getting the sharpness on your hands.
I've now got 8 of these boxes to assemble. 6 of them like this with the regular size panels and the 2 with the half size panels. Going to put them together with pocket screws, of course, but there's a few considerations for these ones. The main one being that I have 2 different types of wood, so I have 2 different types of screws. So look out for the C and the F style. When you're using the C, you want to be driving those into the pine. When you're using the F, we're going to be driving those into the spotted gum. If you don't use the F screws, then you are going to F up your project because you're going to split the wood out on the hardwoods. Now, I've been lucky enough to pick up these corner clamps recently. They do take a little bit of getting used to, but they're really, really kind to your assembly. And lock it in. Now, you have to check though. Look at this. There's a nice big gap there, but it doesn't matter. Quick squeeze this way, quick squeeze this way. And now our joint is lined up perfectly, and that's super easy to drive your screw in. One clamp, one hand, very nice. And bang, one perfect little 90-degree corner. Once they're all lined up and you're happy, because we are doing the spotted gum, we're going to break out a very long 3mm drill bit, and we're going to pilot hole, be careful not to punch through the face. Switch to the fine thread screws. And there is another box frame down.
Now, this was a wee bit silly of me. My spotted gum was 86mm wide, while my pine was 90mm wide, and so I had to do a little bit of planing, and I really wish I had a hand plane. That electric was overkill, and then sand everything up nice and neat. That did cause a slight problem for me later on, as we'll see. Now, this step is to cut some hand holes for the top slat so that I'll be able to pull them out nice and easily. Measuring the width of my hand, I'd like these exactly middle. So this tip I got from Cole from Gifkin's Jig. Place a stop block at the right hand side on your router table. Slowly plunge your piece into the router bit. A spiral bit would work best, but I've just got a straight bit in here. Go about halfway, flip your board over, and then when you plunge in the second time, you're going to see you have a nice clean entry on both ends, and you're going to get rid of all of that tear out. So you can repeat this several times. I think I did about 5 passes, even though it's quite shallow, just because the spotted gum is so hard, and it left some really, really nice handholds. So thanks for that one, Cole. Go do check out his channel, Gifkin's Jig. They do live streams every Sunday, making beautiful dovetail boxes. Back with the round over bit, just to remove that sharp edge as well, and we have some lovely handles. Time to start working with a dodgy old piece of reclaimed plywood that I needed a straight edge on, so we pulled out the AccuCut to give me that. Quick as you like, I can switch over to the Rip Cut, which basically works as the table saw for me, set it to this size, and have it cut exactly out what I need for the width of these drawer bases. Effectively, they are drawer bases, really. only need one of this particular cut. I'll get both pieces for both crates out of it. Then, not pictured, we use the AccuCut just to take off that rounded bit off the end. Reset the size on the rip cut. And I can quickly knock out the 2 square base panels. Now check this out, no camera trickery here. Straight off the saw. And an absolute perfect snuggy little fit. Oh, I was happy with that. Full disclaimer, the second one didn't quite fit as easily. But you get lucky sometimes. That one was beautiful. And here's the second one. Took a wee bit of a plane on the edges to get it squeezing in. Now, that is a thinner piece of stock. It's only 16mm, so I had to reset the jig from the standard 19mm that I had it at, or we would have gone straight through. And again, this is kind of like a way to make drawers. You put your pocket holes all around the edges, tap it into your frame, hopefully with as lovely a fit as this, then drive your screws in. Now don't forget, when you're driving into the spotted gum hardwood, we still need to pre-drill those, or you will crack it out and that would be terrible. Fortunately, on Aldi Special Buys, I managed to grab myself these $10 set of casters, and they are brilliant and cheap, and they work well enough. That'll take 60 kilos across the 4 of them. Compulsory spin. And we can start the assembly of the actual crate. Here's how I worked out what my spacing was going to be. I dry assembled the crate without any gaps in it, measured it, divided that by 4, and that conveniently worked out to be 12mm. And I had some 12mm MDF, so I cut these little spaces, and I could use those and an offcut of the pine slats in order to space out my holes. Now, I had 8 of these to make, and keeping in mind you don't want to smash into the pocket holes, I wanted to pre-drill all of these rather than doing it during assembly. So again, a long drill bit and some countersinking, and pretty soon I had the support struts nicely pre-drilled and I could assemble them onto the crate base. Slide down the first layer, grab my 12mm spacers of MDF and chop them up to the correct gap. But remember, I planed off a little bit to one edge. So after I screwed in the back here, I actually had to get about a 2mm extra spacer on the front. Luckily I had some perspex of that thickness lying around, then we could just check the level, and no one's going to notice that tiny little angle. If you used slats that were exactly the same width, you wouldn't have this problem. But we adapt and overcome. On goes level 3, and finally the top level with the handle. And it's looking like a crate. Check level, check level, check level, check level, check level, and we're level. Lock it in, Eddie. You just have to keep spinning anything with videos. It's compulsory on YouTube. Looking schmick and shiny. I am a fan of Aquadeck for anything that goes outside, and as these are going to be sitting on the veranda, it's just great. You can slop it on, and something that I didn't expect, it actually made the pine fit in with the spotted gum a lot better than I thought it was going to. They're very different coloured woods, but the Aquadeck blends it all in lovely, and if it ever wears off in a year's time, well, you can just put on some more. Reapplying the wheels. Another compulsory spin, and we've got a pair of sexy looking storage crates, which slide gently and beautifully in here. Little locks, keeps them from rolling away. And what they're for are gardening supplies. That's a 25 litre, well what's left of, bag of compost, and it was quite heavy too. A few tools, hidden away nicely while having an attractive bench seat.
Ah, this is better. Back to some nice soft pine. It's like cutting butter after that spotted gum.
So, I'm going to spare you my voice for this one. Enjoy the sounds of the workshop as we make a very simple climate frame for some Jasmine that I got for Wifie.
let's do the balcony as a 3-in-1. We have got the bench seat, the rolling cart, and the Jasmine frame. Let's start up the top here. Obviously the Jasmine is a lot bigger. The one thing we didn't sort of count on, this wall here gets really hot in the sun and it tends to burn the Jasmine, which doesn't like that quite so much. At one point it was invading the neighbours. We've pulled it all off down there, but no, otherwise it's mild success for a really simple project. Reality check time. Guess what? This is now 4 years old. Yeah, pushing 4 summers. And while it's holding up quite well, I've never recoded it, never moved it. Got to get all these stuff off here. Would have to give it a light sand down. And you can see on the exposed end here, where it cops all the wind and rain, that is quite rough and definitely very, very thirsty. That does need some drink. But however, still no splits. The board and panel is holding up. A little bit of movement just in there. But I'm really happy with that. This is tough timber. It's really tough timber and it's holding up very well. And if I actually bothered to take care of it, it would probably be even better. Let's pull out one of these guys. Here we go. So we can see the timber that's been protected. That gets wet. That gets wet quite regularly. And it's still looking pretty darn good. I can't see any rot or anything in there. So it's been sun damaged, but the Australian sun is going to kill anything over time. Yep, they look exactly how you would expect storage to look like when it's got an outdoor life and full of gardening equipment. Been absolutely brilliant. It just lives here now. We stopped using it as a bench seat. We just got ourselves a little patio table instead, and it's Wifie's plant stand. Really like this project. Would make it again. Maybe not from spotted gum, but as we can see, it's a tough wood. Holds up well. But I really should get around to cleaning it and sprucing it up. Bit of aquadeck, that'll come up good as new. Now, I don't often invite folks into the bedroom to appreciate my DIY, so count yourselves lucky. While no woodworking involved, these 2 videos have proven really popular as they're things that most people will want to do at their house at some stage. We're going to add some character with a feature wall, and then hang up some huge and very heavy pieces of original artwork.
And I've got a video on exactly how I learned to use it, but if you watch that, you'll see why for a single wall in a bedroom, in this case, that is completely and utterly unnecessary. Save your time, ignore the spray gun. These are the things you're going to need to get this job done. Right, first up, you want to protect the areas that aren't going to get paint on them. This is what I use as a drop sheet. You can buy dedicated paint sheets. I have one of those, not going to bother with it today, and some good quality tape. The blue branded tapes tend to be better. Don't be a tight ass on the tape front, get yourself some of the blue stuff. Nice big wide roller is going to get through your work fairly quickly. Guess what colour my last wall was? You will probably still need a brush of some description for little bits of touch-up. This is an edging tool and is my first really big tip for doing walls. They're not very expensive, even on one wall. Trust me, when you see this thing in action, you're going to want one. It saves so much time, it's worth the few bucks to pick one up. Also for a few dollars, pick up one of these little edge guides. Handy thing to have. You will also, of course, require paint and a way to mix it. If you get these aerated little paint stirrers, again, a few dollars from the big box shop, or if you own a drill for about the same price, you can pick up one of these mixing sticks. Trust me, once you've used it, you will never go back to the old handheld stirrer. And lastly, of course, you need paint. You may also need to consider an undercoat and primer. We'll take a look at that in a second.
And you'll probably also want a small stepladder to get to those hard to reach places. Here is the victim for today, my boring white bedroom. First thing is to get your protection down on the floor so the paint doesn't end up on the carpet, and apply your blue tape masking to the boundary between the feature wall and your regular walls. Don't forget to cover up any PowerPoints.
Now, I've been really lucky with the wall behind me. I had one tiny scratch just above my head, which I've had to put a coat of undercoat primer on just to cover up that dark mark. You may not be so lucky, and I'm not going to go into wall prep. It's a whole nother topic. If you're going over a dark colour, you're going over a glossy paint, or the paint's really crap and old, you may need an undercoat / primer, and you may want to consider going grey. Ask the guy or girl at your paint shop based on the paint that you're intending to use as your top colour, because sometimes a grey undercoat is going to give a truer representation of your colour than the standard white. Either way, today I've lucked out. I can go straight on to getting the pretty colour on the wall. Speaking of paint colour, there are two decisions you have to make. One of them easy, one of them more difficult. If you don't really care too much about the exact colour, my biggest tip that I can give you is when you go to your big box store, Bunnings here in Australia, they have a discarded paint section. In other words, colours that were slightly off what somebody else ordered, they return them and now they're sitting for sometimes half the price. And let's face it, paint is really expensive. And if you can get one that matches what you think you want, then you're going to save an awful lot of dough. Now, on the more personal choice of colour, obviously the rainbow is open to you. And the old way of getting your different sample pots like we have here and painting them on the wall, not the best way. Firstly, we're going dark, which would mean if I put a colour on I didn't like, I'd then have to wait and paint a few coats over it to get it back to white so everything was even. Second, as you can tell by the light in this video, I've got a really big, bright, lovely window just here, and this side of the room is going to be incredibly dark. So the way the colour looks and at different times of day is going to be different on the wall. So without painting the whole wall, how do you fix that? Answer: a lovely sheet of MDF gives you the surface area, and I can move my 3 shortlisted paints into different lights so that the boss, over a couple of days at different times of day, can choose which one she wanted. At the end of the day, we actually went for this colour, but in this finish. So it is a really lovely flexible option, and when you're ready to paint, your wall isn't damaged. Doing stuff like this also gives you the chance to test that undercoat I was just talking about. Up the top, I've got white. Down the bottom, I had the grey. And effectively, you can see a bit of the grey there. We determined, with the paint we're choosing, it isn't going to make much of a difference. But still a good experiment. One last thing I'll say on testing your paint is that it always goes on brighter and lighter than what the final dry colour is. I mean, look at that. You wouldn't think that it's going to dry out to that lovely midnight or black sea blue. How much paint do you need for a wall? Well, this here I say is a fairly average apartment size bedroom wall, and it's about 9 to 10 square metres. This says here that the paint coverage is going to be 27-ish square metres, which gives me pretty much bang on what I'm going to need for 3 coats. Cutting it fine, but I'll get there. I'm going to be using the fancy drill stirrer. Do be very careful with these. They can splash the paint around. Go slow to start. Okay, cutting in. The first thing you usually do with a single wall like this, and you want a couple of inches, 10-15 centimetres, just in from the edge where your roller's not going to be able to get. The tape protects the bit you don't want to get blue, and it will work perfectly well. I don't do it that way. But I'm going to use up all the paint on this brush first. And this is why I love this little edging tool. Load it up with some paint just by dipping it into your roller tray. Wheels on this side go along the corner of the thing that you're trying to not paint on. And we roll. And you've got a perfect cut in for a first coat. Now, obviously it does have some disadvantages. If you get little bits like here, I don't have enough space, so I'll need the touch-up brush. But if you're really brave, this is where this thing pays for itself. Watch this. Up here, I've got this lovely fresco. It wants to stay white. I don't have any tape, and I couldn't be asked putting any up there. Edging tool. And bang. Be very careful not to get paint on your wheels, or you are going to have to go back and do a tiny bit of touch-up. I mean, a little bit of touch-up is always going to be needed, but effectively, I can get away with not putting the pesky tape up there and get a really nice sharp edge with this beauty of a thing. I'll put a link to it down below if you want to pick yourself up one. As much as I love this thing, I'm not going to use it along the carpet. If you had a hardwood floor, you could probably get away with it, but I would be putting some tape down on that end, I think.
Time to load up and slap it on. You don't have to be too careful on this first coat. But the smoother the better.
Alright, that's most of the first coat on. It looks like a dog's breakfast. My rolling skills are terrible, but trust me and trust the paint, it will come good after 2 or 3 coats. The last thing we need to do is get the first coat along the edge of the carpet. Hardwood floor, I could use the Shoreline edger. However, I'm going to have to do it with a brush, the old-fashioned way. So we can get our brush from before, take it out of the plastic bag, and it should still be good. Lovely. Now, a stiff bit of card will work well, but honestly, these cost absolutely nothing. What we're trying to do is jam that right down in the carpet line, and that will allow us to paint the wall without getting any paint on the carpet. Well, much paint. All right, that's how we cut in and get the first coat on. Believe it or not, that's most of the hard work done. Okay, that's been 2 hours and the wall is now nice and dry. On the second coat you can be a little bit more fussy, then on the third coat you really have to start concentrating on your roller movements to get them nice and smooth so that lovely finish is even across the board. It will polish itself out mostly, just take a bit of care. Onto the third coat, and now you really want to start focusing on your rolling technique a little bit better than mine. We're going to do full length rolls up and down to try and even out all the blotchiness.
If you got the extension pole pictured here, your life will be a lot easier.
Again, being 6 foot tall helps. A good tip is to get rid of the blue tape while your last coat is still a little bit damp. That'll help stop it from tearing everything off and leaving little gouges which you'll have to come back and clean up.
And just a few hours later, with 3 coats on, we're coming to the end already. Told you this would be quick. And will you look at that, just about out of paint. Tiny bit left for some touch-ups. Glad I didn't buy the 4-litre. Speaking of touch-ups, having a pot of your wall or ceiling white on hand is also very, very useful. Worth the effort to go back and fix these little bloopers. And here is the Porter's Black Sea in eggshell finish at its finest. Looking absolutely schmick. Have to thank Wifie for picking the colour. Such an improvement from that boring white wall. Now I've got to make a new bed.
Wifie and I recently acquired some art for our bedroom, and it is huge, to put it lightly. Well, heavily, actually. The most important thing with hanging anything on the wall, particularly a large object, is your planning. So we're going to use some blue tape to make some marks. The first thing is to find not the center for us, but the center of where we wanted these 2 near identical pieces of art to hang. To transfer that mark up top, I like to use my tape measure as a plumb bolt. Using a small spirit level, I'll be able to get the mark I can measure easily down the bottom, up to near the cornice or the crown moulding at the top. Now you can just use your tape measure standing up here on a step ladder, but as you've seen, they go a little bit floppy, and it is difficult at times to do this, so using the plumb bolt method is great. Then you can double check using the tape measure to the sides of your walls, and again mark out the distances so you have a point of reference from which to drill your holes. Now obviously these measurements are going to be unique for every individual piece of artwork or frame. If you have a hanging wire, you don't have to be quite as fastidious as this. If like me you have 2 fixed points to hang a large artwork from, and while you can just measure the distance between the 2 hangers, a quick double check is to measure the width of the material's frame and then remove that from the artwork's width. It should give you the same number. Now I know where my holes are going to go. We're going to pick a distance from the ceiling which we wish this artwork to hang. A bit more mathematics, and it's great to draw yourself out a plan such as I have here. We've decided that we want the artworks to hang 20 centimeters, which means the holes need to be 25 centimeters from the ceiling. The gap between them we wish to be about 30 mils or 1 1/4 inch, which means the 2 closest holes from each panel need to be 2 inches or 50 millimeters apart. Now for the exciting bit with all that planning done,
These are the bolts that I was supplied with the artwork. They are 3/8 of an inch or 10mm wide, but we're not going to drill that out first. We're going to get a 6mm or 1/4 inch drill bit to do the pilot hole. Then we'll go to the full width. Making yourself up one of these dust collecting trays is an extremely good idea. I of course have bricks. If you want to know how to drill into bricks because you're not terribly confident, I'll put a link up to my video on that exact topic. However, if you have stud walls, then this is going to be a little bit trickier for you. I won't go into catches just now, but again, here is a nifty video on good wall anchors for you if you are unfamiliar with them. So a careful pilot hole through the blue tape, followed by the widening bit out to the full 10mm, will leave us 2 nice clean holes, and the dust catcher did its work excellently. No mess. Suck out any of the spare dust in those holes with your vacuum so they don't foul up the plugs as you tap them in. The screws that came with my artwork I believe are actually a tiny bit too small. I've used them, they're working for now, but I think I'll go up to slightly longer ones when I paint this wall eventually. With the 2 central screws in, we can now use our measurements from earlier, a spirit level, and some quick measurements off the ceiling and the adjacent wall to quadruple check the spacing between the holes. Then it's a simple matter of drilling out those holes one more time on each side. And we're ready to hang. And there she is, all done. Just kidding. A little cameo from the lovely Wifie, because these things are heavy. This is sped up a little bit, and there was of course the typical little fuss and bother of trying to get them on. At least I thought there would be. And then clever smarty pants that she is, managed to hook it up without even looking.
Did you get it?
Always satisfying putting a level on top and finding it to be lovely.
Yes. Oh. Mwah.
Up goes panel number 2, again with the lovely Wifie's help. Trying to do this by yourself would have been remarkably challenging. So grab a spare pair of hands where you can.
Stay.
Another quick check square on the second artwork and the gap between them. And we've got some lovely, heavy and beautiful paintings on the wall.
So 2 secrets here. I still have not yet gotten around to painting the white walls into grey like I wish to, and I never built the bed. We did buy a bed because this is made from beech and it is quite a nice little bed, and it is probably cheaper than what I could have got the material for, let alone the construction time and cost and everything. And it looks lovely against our eggshell wall. Speaking of walls, we'll cover off the large artworks too by our friend Saquan. And yeah, they did not fall down. And again, I think I said I was going to change the screws. I never did. They were adequate, the ones that came. That was just me over-engineering as usual. I really do think this will look good on a grey wall though, so I need to get around to that at some stage. Being able to DIY your own solutions is not only very satisfying, but it also lets you flex your creativity. I don't think there is another lamp in the world quite like this one, which I designed and made quickly to light up my poopy butt changing station for my newborn. Hashtag naptime woodworking. I became a dad, and I thought I wouldn't get too much time to make sawdust, but making a project for baby is a lovely excuse to come on down to the garage. Inspired by my mate Philip Douglas Shinbine of Graduate Wizardly, he is the master of the naptime woodworking shtick, and I'm going to try to replicate his attempts at making the most of this quiet time. So sit back and relax as we try to illuminate my evenings by making a nightlight for my poopy change table. Let's go.
Introducing Fixit Finger Sewing Service.
Well, the times they are a-changing. The Poopy Butt Light did us very well, and it is still here in its original place, but the Poopy Butt Mat is no more. She has well and truly outgrown this. She's bloody tall now for a 1-year-old, and yeah, she has to get changed on the floor instead. But when she was little, this was fantastic, and we still use it as a lamp until it finds its new home. Remember, Mark? Be excellent. 2 each. Little finger. The main improvement we made to it after we installed it was just putting one of the muslin cloths over here, because it was a bit bright with Bubba staring up from her vantage point into there, so we wanted to cover that up. But otherwise, it worked absolutely brilliantly, and I'm sure I'll be able to rehouse it, rehome it into whatever it becomes in its new life. Not a bad desk light. Take that up, gets quite bright. Yeah. And now, finally, it is time to come full circle. If you remember those bits of veranda slat that I salvaged off the restoration job I did at my old family home, very shortly after the place was gone, the inspiration struck to turn them into an heirloom. Would you believe in 5 years of woodwork, I had never made a picture frame. But now, it seemed like it was that time. In the late 1970s, my parents bought the family home in Strathfield in Sydney. An old Federation place, they renovated it, loved it, and lived in it, raised their family for the next 40-odd years. We've just sold that place as my parents have both moved up the coast to retire, so my siblings and I decided a memento was in order. We commissioned a watercolour artist, also from Sydney, to paint a lovely picture of the front of the property, and fortunately, when I was doing some work on the veranda a couple of years ago, I managed to salvage some of the original timbers. They were a bit of a mix, but they would do well to make a frame for the watercolour. This would also be the first project that I'd be making with my lovely new CTS table saw. Believe it or not, in 4+ years of woodworking, I have never made a picture frame, so this is certainly not a how-to. I'm not quite set up for doing things the way that you should do picture frames. There are a million videos to teach you how to do that. This is a project about framing my youth. I lived at the Strathfield place until I basically started travelling in my early 20s after graduating from uni, and it will forever remain the place that shaped me into the person I am today. So here in the garage of Wifie and mine's first home, let's see what we can do about turning these old veranda palings into a family heirloom. So the first thing I did was joint the edges of the boards, and then I had to be very careful. I didn't have much stock to work with, and I needed to cut these into enough material to make the 4 sides. Fortunately, with the new table saw, this didn't prove too challenging. If I look a bit tentative, that's because this is my first project using the thing, and I had a jolly good time learning basically what I can and can't get away with. It wasn't all quite as smooth as what I showed here. I had a couple of little nervous moments, but with the push sticks and the featherboard, I got through these narrow cuts quite successfully. Out of the haul, I reckon I've got some Meranti, some Merbo, and some Silky Oak. There was some pine too, but that didn't have to make the cut. After I had my thin strips sliced, one quick run with the plane over each side, jointed the edge nicely for glue up. Twelve pieces to make 4 sides, and of course praying that they don't stick together and you don't put glue on the wrong bits. Couple of cauls to hold them mostly flat, and I left those overnight to dry. They were looking pretty good, but now I had to figure out how I was going to miter them. I don't have a picture frame sled, I don't have any sleds on the table saw yet. So I figured I'd probably do these on the miter saw. Not the most accurate tool, but I think I can get it to work. Before I could think about that though, I had to take out my planer, being a hand plane, just to smooth out the slight variation in thickness between all the pieces.
Once I'm all settled in with the table saw, I reckon a thicknesser might be the next tool on the to buy list. Before chopping the angles, I decided to cut in the rebate. As you saw earlier, I've got an old frame that I picked up for $10 from the local charity shop. It had a nice piece of glass in it and a bit of hardware which I would be able to recycle. But I just didn't like the way that it looked, hence why we're building this one. I tried a quick Roman OG bit, but I really didn't like the profile, so instead I decided to manufacture my own, using that giant cove bit and a small box bit or coring bit. And after a few test runs, this is what I came up with. Yeah, that should do nicely. I'll save you watching the many routes, but needless to say, they were done in several passes, until that came out at the end of it. It wasn't too bad, but I really wanted the transitions between the colours of wood to match the physical transition, so we took out the little block plane and chamfer all the things. Just slicing away enough of the timber until the curves matched with the changes in timber. Hit it with the sandpaper, and that came out quite nicely. I was also able to salvage the hardware off the old frame, and I wanted to keep the wire and also these little points, so I'd be able to use them when I reassembled everything in the new frame. That backing board would also come in handy, as would that white border thing. It was quite nice and clean, and one of the reasons I selected that particular thing from the shop. This frame was actually incredibly well made. I had to cut it very, very carefully in order to get the sides off, and gently get the piece of glass out. In hindsight, I probably should have gone for Perspex, but something in me just said I wanted glass, so I tapped on all the ones in the shop until I found one that tinged. That glass would set the size of my frame, and now that I'd measured twice that, I would hopefully only cut once these miters. But as good as the CTS is, like most table saws, particularly job site saws, the miter gauge that came with it was completely rubbish. So that confirmed it. I was going over to the miter saw, and using my Vipin Envisage Design bevel gauge, set that at a very accurate 45, transferred that to my blade, and then made sure that I cut each of the opposing miters on opposite sides of the blade, because then even if I was out by half a degree, then the mating face should be out by the same amount in the opposite direction, and that will hopefully give me fairly tight miters. Once I'd cut the first pair, I could then mark out exactly how long I needed my pieces to be, and snuck up on them very carefully back at the saw, using some blue tape to help eliminate the chip out. That was a lovely clean result. But because it's my first frame and I don't trust gluing miter joints, I also needed to figure out reinforcement. With my fancy routed profile on there, I couldn't do external splines, so I decided to do internal splines. Using the slot cutter to make the mortises in the corners of the frames worked very well. And then I picked up another little piece of reclaimed timber, this off my current property. It's a bit of Australian cedar from out of an old window box, which I could then use the hand plane to gently take down until it fits snugly in those mortises that I'd cut. Pulling out the Lark diameter tool, thanks Derek, I could find out what sort of profile the inside of my slot cutter would make, and then use that to mark out some mini biscuits. Like I only had to make 4 of these because they were a bit of a pain in the ass. But I managed to chop them out, got the rasp and filed them down to the correct size. Then it was time for a dry fit. I was really quite pleased with this. However, I did notice that my sort of hand-cut profiles weren't quite matching up, and that's something that I would have to deal with after the glue had gone in. But for now, all I needed to do was trim down those biscuits so that they weren't interfering with the rebate, and this happened really easily with a quick chisel plunge. And then my artisanal splines could be glued on in, tied up with the band clamp, and left overnight to dry. Coming back the next day, and that worked pretty well. I was happy enough anyway for my first attempt at a frame, a few small little gaps, but what are you going to do? I'm sure I'll get better as I make more of these over the years. The good news is, when I gave it a shake, it did not want to fall apart. Those splines worked really, really well. Also, fortunately, one of my mates gave me this beautiful Japanese carving chisel set for my 40th birthday a few months ago, and I could use the different diameters on these in order to try and match up the profiles, and where I had some of the boards that were slightly thicker than the others, I could have a lot of fun just gently easing over the edges and shaving away bit by bit with the different shaped chisels until everything mated up very, very nicely. To help hide those gaps, and before we sanded it down flush, put in the old clear PVA glue, let it soak in for a second, and then working within the same colour of wood, hit it with the sandpaper backwards and forwards so that the sawdust from that colour of wood goes into that colour gap, and that actually worked really well. After that, I could smooth off the entire frame up to about 400 and give myself a blister on my thumb by using it as a sanding block to get into those little grooves. As I hope this would become a hand-me-down family heirloom, I decided to give it the good old sign too. Of course, that could get confused with my brother Jonathan, but he's currently not doing woodwork, so hey, it's going to be me. While I had the Japanese chisels out, I decided, let's give the Dremel the day off. I've been having fun with hand tools on this project, and so I tried for the first time to do some carving with the V-tool bit. It wasn't too hard, and my handwriting looks like I'm 5 anyway, so quite frankly, this was a fantastic result. The bendy corners were a little bit trickier coming across the grain, but we got there eventually. Coloured it in with a texture, hit it with some sandpaper, and then that was ready for finish. Tack cloth off all of the sandy dust, and here's another new addition. So I've been a fan of the custom grit by my mate Scotty for a while now, as a few of you have probably realised, but I recently saw him use these pads from Hammaroo. They're slightly different strengths of sponge. There's a yellow one, which I've got the step 1 on here. Turn the sander right down to the slowest speed and use that to work it into the grain, and that was so much better than doing it by hand. And the sort of foamy softness of the pad was great, because even in those profiles I could still use the power sander. I still had to revert to doing it by hand in some of those more tricky corner places. After that was done, you could instantly jump up to the step 2, change to the orange pad, and work it on in. Look at the shine that brings up. It's beautiful stuff, custom grit. Make sure you try it out. Not only is it a polish, but custom grit is a finish, and apart from putting a little bit of beeswax over the top to make it smell good, that is done. Those buffing pads you can just store in an airtight bag, and they will keep indefinitely. With the finish finished, it was time to put this all together. Very, very gently handling the shatty death glass that will break into 1,000 shards if I get it wrong. I attached the watercolour to its border, and fortunately that border was exactly the right size. Return the old backing plate. Drilled a few little tiny relief holes, and gently tapped on in the original points. Not the most elegant solution, but it worked. While we're at it, we might as well brand all the things, and then realise that because mine is a landscape and the old one was a portrait, that the old wire would not work, so I had to flip that around 90 degrees. Drill some new holes. Still the old hardware. And then break out a bit of the old picture wire. Now, I'm not going to show you how to tie this knot because I just googled it on the internet and I did a terrible job, which I then hid with some black electrical tape. But at least we were done. I actually ended up timing this really well, and it became the Christmas present that my siblings gave to Mum and Dad for 2022's Christmas celebrations, and they both cried, so mission was accomplished. But before that, I hung it up at home just to see how it would look, and ain't she schmick. Blue Ginger Designs did an absolutely fantastic job realising that photograph into that beautiful watercolour of my family home, and having the frame made from the Meranti silky oak and the Merbo from the back veranda just nearly brings a tear to my eye. I guarantee you this isn't the best frame I'll ever make, but quite honestly, it's probably going to be the most important.
And that frame eventually made it up the coast to my parents' new castle, with views just over the beach and ocean, and a lifetime of memories hanging on the dining room wall. I look forward to nothing more than reliving my own childhood up in Foster, visiting my grandparents, then taking my daughter Nova to her grandparents every Christmas to share an Australian beach summer with a family, and create a lifetime of memories of our own that nobody can knock down or take away.